One.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live stream with EU Made Simple. And this is a very exciting day today. We're back with Jonas. You'll know him. He was very popular last round with the Danish elections, and he's an expert in everything that's politics. I mean, Jonas even lived in Scotland. And I'm here, of course, with Lambertus, our host, EU Made Simple, the one you see in every single one of our videos. So we're here together. And me too. But as you can see, I'm not in a shirt. I'm actually on holiday. So this is a little bit sketchy. My internet won't go out. But you know, I just want to start with you, Lambertus. What are your thoughts? This is the British election. What's at play here?
I can go to Jonas straight away, but for me, really, it's almost like a sort of, from an outside perspective, a referendum on Keir Starmer, right? Because if he loses massively today, which, to be honest, it is kind of looking that way, the question becomes whether he can actually stay on as prime minister. And with a rise of reform, who is, well, yeah, more extreme to the right than Keir Starmer, them doing so well, the question also becomes is, will there be a reform prime minister in the next UK election, for example? So those are kind of my two takeaways already that I think this election is all about. But Jonas, I want to move the ball to you because you are more of an expert than I am. And Jonas, why don't you can you explain to us what this election is even about? Because this is a local election, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, both of you guys. So yeah, I've lived in Scotland for quite a few years and worked a couple of years in politics in Scotland for the Scottish Conservatives. So do forgive me if I clearly know a lot more about the Scottish politics than the English and Welsh side of this, but I've been following that too. So what's essentially happening today is we've got 3 different elections in 3 different parts of Great Britain. We've got the local elections in England, where they use sort of a staggered system. So it's not all of the local councils in England that are up for election today. It's only some of them. And some of the councils only have about a third of their councillors up for election. It's a very complicated system, but the gist of it is like what has already been said. Reform UK, which is the National Conservative Party led by Nigel Farage, is very much on the incline. You can see that on the screen right there as well, where they've already netted a positive 535 councillors, which is really impressive. What's also happening today is devolved parliamentary elections in Scotland and in Wales. So Scotland's been led by the pro-independence, quite left-wing, centre-left to left-wing SNP, or Scottish National Party, for 19 years now. They're holding elections there too. It looks like the SNP are about to re-win power there. And then in Wales, you've had leadership from the Welsh Labour Party there for 27 years, ever since there's been this iteration of the Welsh Parliament. But you could see a massive surge in the Plaid Cymru party there, which is the Welsh pro-independence party. And they're looking like the likeliest next government there. But we also see Reform UK are on the incline in Scotland to a certain degree, but they're very much on the incline in Wales as well. So there's a lot of narratives coming out of this election, or these elections, because it's multiple elections all across Great Britain. As I mentioned, Reform UK on the incline, the National Conservative Nigel Farage party. Labour massively on the decline. Keir Starmer is now the most unpopular prime minister ever, as long as we have been recording popularity for prime ministers. You can see that reflected massively in the results so far. The Conservatives are losing quite a lot of seats too. And then you've got the Green Party, which is a sort of socialist, eco-socialist left-wing party, which has been on the incline quite a bit recently as well under its new leader, Zach Polanski. So as I said, a lot of really interesting narratives.
Yeah, and Jonas, I can't wait to go into what all of this means and actually look at specific results, but also just for the audience to understand, like, these are local elections, right? So what kind of power can these new mayors, these councils actually win by winning their seats? You know, what's the split? How does it work in the UK with almost your unitary level at the top and then the local level below?
I'll start in Scotland and Wales, because I can give you easy answers on those. In Scotland, the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish government have massive powers when it comes to issues like the NHS and infrastructure, health, social care, all of these things, also justice. In Wales, the Welsh Parliament, or the Senedd as it's called, has slightly less powers than the Scottish Parliament, but also quite a lot of powers in just like running a lot of stuff that you normally link to the UK government, but which Scotland and Wales run on their own. In England, that's a very difficult question that you've just asked, and that's because England has a very messy local political scene, in the sense that some parts of England have what's called two-tier council systems, where you've got district or borough councils who run and operate some parts of local services, while you've also got county councils, which cover multiple local councils. And then other parts of England, thankfully, only have the one level of council. All of this is getting reworked currently. There's a massive restructuring going on of councils. So within a couple of years, it'll hopefully be a bit more simple. But one of the kinks of the English political system is just how complicated the local councils are there, and how complicated and how varied it is in terms of who has which powers in which parts of England.
Is this maybe also one thing, and I'm sorry about the background noise, everyone, but I'm actually in a hotel in a lobby. As you can see, it's not my usual background. So I do apologize, but I think everyone can hear me fine. So before we go into the results, maybe one more question around these elections. Can you almost compare it to like the midterms in the US, of almost like a sort of a message to the current government, whether they're doing a good job or whether not so much, that kind of thing, or would that be a wrong analysis?
No, that's a very accurate analysis. And I think it's the type of thing that frustrates a lot of local politicians in England, and a lot of devolved politicians in both Scotland and Wales. But one of the biggest things that's been discussed at all of these different elections going on today is Keir Starmer, his disapproval. It is immigration, even though immigration is a power that is purely lies for the London government, the Keir Starmer-led government. So yes, it does become a referendum on the UK government and what people think of it. And you see that reflected in the results as they're coming in right now. Those results look very similar to what you see in polling on the national level as well.
Jonas, I just want to get your analysis as well. I mean, there's been a lot of key questions inside of this election, right? And I think, of course, the rise of reform has been a big one. But another one is probably the rise of some other parties, right? You've got the Liberal Democrats, who've got quite a good showing here. They're second. They've got quite a few councillor seats, at least in England. We'll see how they do in Scotland and Wales, as well as the Greens, who have done quite well as per these results. You know, is this, as people are saying in the comments, right? Is this kind of a test for some of the traditional parties, such as Conservative and Labour, which have just been pummeled in the past few weeks and months, or even years, since the Labour government took power, and even before then, when the Tories were in power for many years right after Brexit?
I think these elections and the local elections last year reflect a new type of politics in the UK, multi-party system. And I think that it's people feeling unrepresented and disenfranchised by the Conservatives and by Labour. The Liberal Democrats have been around for a while, but they've always been this sort of little smaller third party. But as you pointed out, they're doing really, really well today. But yeah, it is the rise of a multi-party system. Reform UK on one end, the Greens on another, Labour and the Conservatives trying to hold on to some power in the middle. So yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with that.
I mean, I lived in Scotland for quite a while as well, and I'm already moving forward here quite a lot with Scotland, especially since I've got a leaning towards there. I know a lot less about England and English politics, but from what I understood in Scotland, there's a lot of people who are very pro-EU in Scotland, and who kind of resent the Brexit referendum that was in 2016, where Scotland voted majoritarily to stay within the Union, and the rest of England kind of decided to leave. Is this something that's still influenced today with regards to potential polling when it comes, or potential results when it comes to the Scottish elections? Are people punishing even Labour, well, obviously the Conservatives, but even Labour, for what they've done in terms of Brexit, and potentially, and I'm going a bit further here, with regards to leaving the UK to rejoin the EU, something that's been floated around. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. This election isn't about the EU in that sense. The response to Brexit came many, many years ago in Scotland, and it actually wasn't that strong against the Conservatives as you might have expected. However, what is really, really interesting from an EU perspective on Scotland is the EU features very much in this vision for an independent Scotland that the SNP have put forward. The SNP have pitched an idea of a progressive independent Scotland, which is part of the European Union. So the SNP very, very pro-EU, and if at one point in the future there is an independent Scottish state, very much expect that one of its first actions will be to rejoin the EU.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, Lambertus, what do you think about that, right? I mean, that's the whole reason this channel started, is Brexit. I mean, that's when you started this channel, when was that? A few years ago now. I mean, one of the, for those who don't know, Lambertus started this channel to explain to his friends about European politics. I mean, what are your thoughts, Lambertus, on how the EU will view this?
I mean, obviously, Brexit definitely pissed me off massively about like 6-7 years ago now when it happened, or when it actually happened, and that was actually the reason I started the channel. And it's actually quite funny if you talk about like the 28 member states, the new member that could potentially join the EU, if it could potentially be Scotland, you know, because we apparently can't get our act together to get any of the Balkan states in, or Moldova and Ukraine. And Scotland, obviously, if they became independent, they would probably be very easy to take up in the EU, because they were already part of the EU in the past, and completing all of the chapters in order to join the EU would probably be a simple process. But then again, I mean, we're diving deep into Scotland, but why not? Jonas, could these elections lead to yet another referendum on Scottish independence or not? Or is it, what's your view there?
Mm-hmm. The Scottish National Party have pitched this election as an independence election. They've said that if they get a majority, which would be 65 seats, they would see that as a sign of people wanting another independence referendum. And they've also promised in their manifesto another referendum by 2028. Now, that all sounds like a referendum's just around the corner. The legalese of it, though, is that the Scottish government cannot call an independence referendum. They need that to be called by the UK government, as per the Scotland Act of 1998. That's how they got their independence referendum in 2014. That was a deal struck between then UK Prime Minister David Cameron and First Minister of Scotland Alex Salmond at that time. And this has all been tried in the courts. You guys might remember a First Minister of Scotland named Nicola Sturgeon. She once promised that she would call a Scottish independence referendum. That went through all of the courts, who determined at the end of that case that that was not up to the Scottish government. It's up to the UK government. And the UK government has made quite clear, the current Labour government, that they would not be interested in calling another referendum. In a quite prolific interview that Wes Streeting, who's the Secretary of State for Health, gave a couple of weeks ago, he said that this was not in the cards. And we understand that he was speaking on behalf of the whole Labour government right now. The Conservatives are likewise very against another referendum. The only question is, what would it mean if Nigel Farage and Reform UK take power in probably 2029? Would that mean another referendum? He's been a little more open to the idea of another Scottish independence referendum than the two traditional parties of power. He's said that he could see in the future that it might make sense for another referendum. So I don't think we'll get one until probably if there is a Reform UK government, or if there's some parliamentary situation where a party would need support from the SNP in London to gain power, that they then strike a deal to make another referendum. So we're still looking at many, many years out in the future before this becomes a reality.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that too, and you know, we're talking a lot about the SNP being a pro-independence party, trying to get its own, to try and get its vote right back in 2014. But I'm just wondering, the landscape has changed quite a lot, and it's not just the SNP that's calling for independence referendum, right? You've also got the Greens, which have been looking to potentially be part of that coalition of an independence referendum, and then eventually citing rejoining the EU as part of the broader deal if that were to happen. And I'm just thinking that outsider perspective, yes, you know, the next general election 2029, if that changes up, if coalition of reform, and maybe you've got a coalition of reform, we'll see who wins, but if you have some new players in the parliament in 2029, then maybe we could get an election. But I'm wondering on the flip side, this is going to be a lot of pressure on the British government, the Labour government, which has essentially failed to do many of the campaign promises it asked for. Keir Starmer, the most unpopular prime minister for a very, very long time for multiple reasons. And also a prime minister who has, promised a rapprochement to Europe, but who has not fully delivered on that yet. This is just going to put more pressure on him, right?
Absolutely. Both the result we're expecting in Scotland, also the one we're expecting in Wales, and also the local elections that we're seeing rolling in right now in England. This is all massive pressure on Keir Starmer at a time when he's already super, super embattled. He's very unpopular. And then we've had this whole Peter Mandelson scandal that I'm sure a lot of viewers will be familiar with. Peter Mandelson appointed as UK ambassador to the US, despite Starmer knowing that he had pretty close ties to Jeffrey Epstein. That's been a rolling scandal for a couple of months now in the UK. I think a lot of people see Keir Starmer as a prime minister who is towards the end of his period. There's a lot of frustration within the Labour Party. Right now, it's just a case of, will the backbenches openly revolt? Will his cabinet openly revolt? But yeah, no, this election will have massive impacts for Keir Starmer. If it's even worse than expected, that might be a call to action for some of the potential contenders out there to replace him, and some backbenchers who look at these results and go, I can see Reform winning my council area. That really scares me. I want to be reelected. Keir Starmer's not the guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unpopular. And I just want your opinion as well. I'm not an expert. I used to live in the UK, but there's also been this, and I forgot his name, a very popular Labour, he's not a backbencher, he's a frontbencher. No, he's not even elected, but he was prevented from Keir Starmer from accessing even the general, the assembly. And this is basically the end of Starmer at this point, from what I can see from the results. What happens if he doesn't give in? If he stays there and he really kind of holds his ground? I mean, obviously, there's not going to be any new general elections. There's no way that Labour is going to call or vote no confidence to have new general elections anytime soon, as long as the polls look like this. But is there any chance of a serious internal problem and potentially some kind of some attacks against democracy here, in terms of how people see Labour, clearly an unpopular party, just clinging on to power, especially Keir Starmer, with regards to this other opponent whose name I forgot.
So who you're talking about is Andy Burnham. He's the mayor of Greater Manchester, former MP, former minister during the Gordon Brown years. He is immensely popular by UK politician standards. He often polls as the politician in the UK with the highest net approval rating. He's sort of on the centre leftish sphere, what you'd call the soft left of Labour. So he tried to stand as a candidate to be MP a couple of months ago when there was a by-election in a Manchester seat called Gorton and Denton. But the NEC, which is the Labour National Executive Committee, shut it down. They said, you're not allowed to stand, because they worried that if he stood and if he won, that would mean, well, he would need to resign his seat in Manchester as mayor, and that would lead to an election there. At least that was their official reasoning. The NEC is also controlled by Keir Starmer and his allies, so there was probably also worries that if Andy Burnham came into Parliament, he would be able to start launching a coup against Starmer. In terms of replacing Starmer, you guys will remember the tumultuous years of the Conservatives between, 2019 and 2024. That is not quite likely to happen to Labour, and that's purely just because Labour make it more difficult to replace a prime minister or a leader compared to the Conservatives. What it takes is, if I remember correctly, it would need to be 80 MPs who come out against Starmer and call for him to resign. I think it's a petition system, which is difficult. They've got a lot of MPs, but that's still a high amount. So the Conservatives can easily replace leader, the Labour Party less so. So there could be an element of, because of some technicalities, he can cling on for quite a while. At some point, though, if it becomes clear that there's a narrative here, I think his cabinet will be the ones to have to pull the plug. If he loses support from some of the very, very prominent members of his cabinet, very prominent figures within the party, I think that might be the end of him. And we already saw yesterday, reports came out that Ed Miliband, a former leader of Labour and currently the Secretary of State for Net Zero and Energy, apparently spoke to Starmer and told Starmer, you need to set out a plan for your resignation. So we're already kind of seeing a bit of some of the senior cabinet members coming out against Starmer. A couple of weeks ago as well, another senior member, Pat McFadden, who was a massive player back in the Blair days, who currently serves in the Works and Pensions portfolio. He was also a bit hesitant to defend Starmer on TV. That was another massive blow to him. So if stuff like this begins to snowball, that could essentially force Starmer out, even if it's not technically. He would probably have to see the writings on the wall at that point.
But I hope it sounds a little bit better. It's not going to be amazing, but a little bit better. What I wanted to also ask you is about Starmer. Like, where did he go wrong? He had such a massive majority in the parliament that he won, 2 years ago? And you would think with such a majority behind him, he could literally, have carte blanche to implement what he wants to implement. And yet he is among the most unpopular prime ministers, that not ever, of course, but among very, very unpopular. Why? What did he do wrong? Are there 2 or 3 things that he massively messed up?
Mm-hmm. I think it almost starts in the 2024 general election, where he wins a massive majority, but he doesn't win that many votes, and percentage vote share wasn't high. Nobody was excited about Keir Starmer. There will have been people who were excited about him, but the vast majority of people who voted Labour probably weren't very excited about him. So he didn't come in with the sort of hype that someone like Tony Blair or David Cameron came in with from the beginning. But then very, very early in his election, or very early in his electoral term as prime minister, you had a series of freebie scandals, which were scandals where him and senior members of his cabinet had received free clothes and tickets to fun things and stays at apartments that were very nice and fancy by senior donors, including a very prominent Lord Ali. That sort of raised a lot of questions. Labour had come in saying, we're going to do things differently. We're not sleazy like the Conservatives. And one of the first things that happens to them turns out, this scandal that made a lot of them look a bit sleazy. Then you also had just a long series of U-turns. Starmer, as one of the first big policy things, he rolls back this scheme that the UK had for quite a while, universal winter fuel payments for elderly people. He would later pull back and re-roll it out, but that was very unpopular. There were narratives now pensioners are going to freeze during winter. He also tried to make it more difficult to get disability benefits. This was very unpopular with the left of the party, and just a lot of these things that felt very not Labour policy that he tried to introduce, and then made worse by the fact that he had to roll most of them back because he didn't have support of his own party on them. And then, of course, now this whole Peter Mandelson affair has really, really tarnished Labour, and I think it's made it's set a lot of these negative feelings in stone in a way where before maybe people could have listened to Keir Starmer, if he started being more successful in the future. But that's just probably very difficult now. After
I mean, it's crazy, right? Because 64 of the 136 councils have been counted right now, and Labour has lost 386 seats. I mean, that's insane, right? I mean, has there ever been such a swing in English politics? Because also the Conservatives, who would normally probably rise, have also lost 256 seats so far. So it's a bloodbath, right, for the traditional parties.
Absolutely. I mean, last year was pretty bad for them as well, to be fair. Reform UK did very well at local elections last year too. You do see this with unpopular prime ministers where they're really, really punished on the local level during these local election years. But yeah, no, this is very bad.
Hi guys, just want to quickly interrupt. We have a super chat from Goose Springsteen. Thank you so much for £10. I think you gave twice. Sorry for not answering the first time, but he asks, let me just get it up for us right now. He asks, a lot of Labour people see moving closer to the EU as fundamental. Under the FPTP, I think it's a fight Farage would love, as he can talk about betrayal, losing the pound, and unrestricted immigration. I mean, this is what people have been talking about when it comes to the EU, especially in the UK, for many, many years. Lambertus, you must have seen this a lot when you were there. Is this something people, were talking about even before, during the election campaign for Brexit? And I mean, I can talk about personal experiences from recently. I can see this trends continuing, but was this always the view of the EU from the British side?
Is that a question to me, Paul, or
Yeah.
Well, for me, maybe I'm not quite sure where you're going with that, but for me, and what I would like to understand is, at the moment, when you look at Brexit, there is a majority, I'm not mistaken, in the polls currently that see Brexit as a mistake. So there's a significant amount of number of people in Britain who think Brexit might not have been the good idea and probably would be willing to get a new kind of cooperation with the European Union. So what I'm really wondering is why Labour is not jumping on this, right? Because yes, of course, most people that are voting reform don't want the EU, sure, but a lot of Labour people, just like the comment in the comments, do seem to want closer connections to the EU. So why is Starmer so hesitant to just say, bigger statements with a vision saying, we're going to go back into the single market because it will help our economy, for example? And this is what I don't understand. Like, why is Labour not taking a more aggressive approach in this, like the Greens have, for example, who are obviously benefiting from an approach like that, and like the Liberal Democrats also have? Why is Labour so hesitant?
I mean, I think it is this has been a difficult issue for Labour ever since the referendum. During the referendum, there were factions within the Labour Party that were pro-Brexit as well, especially some of the more left-wing factions. So there's always been a little bit of a divide. It then continued under Jeremy Corbyn, who was, I think a lot of people think, not super happy with the EU either. He was kind of anti-EU, so he sort of struggled with finding a position on it. And then once it started dragging out in terms of the negotiations, I think a lot of people in the UK just wanted it over and done with, because it sort of ended up as this massive, massive delay on anything else political. It became the only thing you could talk about. Nothing else was happening in terms of developing the country. And I think that sort of became embedded in the DNA of both the Conservatives and of Labour. We just needed to get it done with. People voted for Brexit. We don't want to be the parties that sort of reject the democracy of the referendum. Let's just get it over and done with. And now, Starmer wants closer relations, and he's been working on that with varying degrees of success. But I do think if he came out saying, let's do another referendum to get back into the EU, I think a lot of people who might not follow politics very closely would feel a bit of trauma from that, in terms of, we're back to the EU debate, which was so difficult for the UK.
I mean, from my experience, I arrived in 2020, right? And 2020 is just the year when they left the EU, and I was there until about 2025. And in the 5 years I was there, I saw inflation, increased rent prices. I saw increased immigration, or at least the debate on immigration became more volatile. I saw the increase of reform everywhere. I saw 3 or 4 different prime ministers in the time I was there. It was complete chaos. I mean, ever since they left the EU, the UK has been in this spiral of, if you look at their 10-year interest rates, their interest rates are super high. There's a loss of trust in the government. I'm not at all surprised when I see the conventional Labour and Conservative Party be absolutely pummeled in the election results after what they've done to Britain, after what they've done to the UK. It's just been failure after failure on their part. So when you see reform come in and then they blame it on, again, the EU, they're mostly the ones who spiked the EU debate in the first place. Nigel Farage, and then Boris Johnson took that debate and made it his own, and then got elected on that platform. When I look at what they say about that Reform UK, 30-35%, I'm just thinking the rest of the parties are much more pro-EU and have realized what leaving the EU has done to this country. So for me, it's a bit tragic. And I appreciate the fact that those who are on the Labour government, those who had the Brexit referendum, who saw that was the will of the people, for better or for worse, are now thinking, we don't want to go back on that debate. We don't want to go back to the EU debate. Mm-hmm. But I'm almost thinking from the other side of this, is the EU debate the only one to be had? Ever since Britain or the UK has left the EU, Donald Trump got elected. They lost their special relationship with Donald Trump, if they ever had one, or with America. And I'm just thinking, is joining the EU, Lambertus, I don't know what your opinion is on there, especially if we let them back in. That's another thing we have to think about. But is joining the EU something, it's not a silver bullet for sure, but it's got some benefits, right?
Yeah, but I think I'll go with definitely. My opinion. I think it was a terrible mistake for sure. I've got a channel about the EU, right? So it'd be strange if we had another opinion there. But I do see Jonas's point that it's a massive pain body, right? And having another referendum on Brexit, that is something that Farage kind of weaponize, in my opinion, to another level, right? And I'm not sure that would do any good. What I'm thinking is, let's not do a new membership for UK. That will take loads of years. I'm thinking more around, let's do some other type of integration with the UK, right? When it comes to security, when it comes to the single market, the customs union, there's lots of forms that the UK can work together with the European Union without being a member, which I think would be beneficial for both the continent and the UK, right? So that's kind of the form I'm hoping for. But Jonas, maybe over to you, and maybe we can do a little bit of a refresher, because we're quite deep into this Brexit debate, of what the status is of these elections. Like, what's the status currently in England? What's the status in Wales? And what's the status in Scotland at the moment, for anyone new that's just joined us?
Absolutely. Can I actually get you to scroll down so we can look at the maps as well? So what we're seeing is, of course, massive surge in Reform UK councillor seats. We've got, I think it's just over 500 Reform UK councillor seats. They've picked up their first ever London Borough Council in Hackney, which is a massive deal for them. They're doing very well on county council levels, which tended to be an area where the Conservatives did well. So that's one of the big narratives. The other is that the Greens are doing pretty well. They are especially doing well in Manchester, where we've got all of those results come in. They're also doing well in some parts of London. We're still waiting for the sort of central London areas where they're expected to do the best. But they have won a mayoralty in London for Hackney, which is a big deal for them. And then we've got both Labour and the Conservatives losing a bunch of councillors, and we've got general just split. We've got a multi-party system that's really now emerging in the UK and in England specifically, where that's a very new thing. Scotland and Wales are a bit more used to it. If we hop over to Scotland, what we're seeing there is quite interesting, in the sense that the Scottish National Party, the pro-independence party there, they've went down quite significantly in polls over the past period of time, and they've had a lot of internal scandals. There are a lot of problems around public services. However, because the unionist vote, which is essentially parties that support the maintainment of the Great British Union, anti-independence parties, because they're so split now with the introduction of Reform UK, the SNP are able to hold on to quite a lot of seats. So you see there, they've got the Carrick and Doon Valley seat that they've won, but they've also picked up, if you scroll all the way up north, they've picked up the Shetland Islands, which is a Liberal Democrat stronghold that the SNP have now picked up. Despite the SNP being expected to have some pretty big decreases vote percentage wise, they're picking up seats, and you'll probably see them continue to lead a government after this. They've led the Scottish government for 19 years now, I believe. So that's a pretty massive deal for them. The question is whether they're able to form a majority on their own, or whether they'll need support from the Scottish Greens, which, it's important to mention, is a different party altogether from the Green Party of England and Wales, who we'll otherwise be talking about a lot. And then if we turn to Wales, we're not really getting any results just yet, but we're getting a lot of on-the-ground reporting. First of all, Wales has changed electoral system from last time around, so there's a lot of question marks around what does that mean for all the especially smaller parties. Wales used to have additional member system, which is the same as what Scotland has, but has now moved into just multi-member constituencies and proportional representation. One of the big stories we're hearing out of Wales right now is that Welsh Labour, who have led the government there since 1999, when the Welsh Senedd, which is their parliament, was founded, they're on course for massive losses. Ellie Ned Morgan, who's the current First Minister and leader of Welsh Labour, people are expecting her to not re-win a seat. So that's a massive deal. I mean, that would be like the Prime Minister not losing their seat, or not re-winning their seat. And Welsh Labour have already been out conceding this election. What we expect there is Plaid Cymru, which is the Welsh pro-independence party. We're expecting them to be sort of jousting it out with Reform UK and Wales for who gets the most seats. But because neither of them are on course for a majority of seats, It's very likely that Plaid will lead the next government there under Rena Piorath, who is their very charismatic and talented political leader. And that they'll either then work with the Green Party, who are also on course to pick up seats for the first time in Wales now, or the Liberal Democrats, or maybe even the remnants of Welsh Labour. So a lot of really interesting stories going on across all three countries of Great Britain.
I just want to say thank you very much to Goose Springsteen for £10. Thank you very much for your super chat. Who says Labour are stuck in a bad place with the EU, as the EU is less generous, fearing the next UK government is Reform plus Labour, and it can't get close enough for the benefits, but the attempt motivates the anti-EU voters. Goose Springsteen, thank you very much for another £10. I totally agree. The EU is a bit between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the UK. It's struggling to find the right balance between, do we want to go into more deals with the EU or with the UK, or less deals? Because of course it's very volatile. On-off relationship with the EU has been a constant since the formation of the relationship between the two. So I totally agree. It's a very volatile relationship, and definitely one that it makes it hard for the EU to go towards the UK. We also have another super chat from Adventurous Gold with 50 Danish krona. Thank you very much. Who says Brexit has been amazing for the field of predictive economics. Yes, I sort of agree there. Thank you very much for your comment. And we have Nick Trimpos. Thank you for joining the stream with €5. It's good to see you here. Who says, so wait, the guy who said that Brexit is a good thing and the EU is to blame for immigrants is winning. And yes, he is winning. And I would argue this is because it is a first past the post system. I want to pick your brain on that, Jonas, just in a second, as well as you, Lambertus, because you've got a more German approach to how elections work. So I'd like to see what you think there. But yes, it does seem that reform is on the march. They've swept across the country. They've won a ton of councils in England, and it looks like they might break through in Scotland and Wales, two countries which formerly they've not had much success in. Lambertus, what do you think about the British election system? Of course, it depends on the country. We've got Wales, we've got Scotland. They've got two different systems, as well as first past the post when it comes to the councils, and as well as general election in general. But do you think this is affecting the vote share? And Jonas, feel free to step in where it might be relevant there.
So firstly, I'm going to ask a very beginner question. Jonas, first past the post, is that the same? Does that also work for councils in the UK? Okay, so it's for both. Okay, great. Well, I mean, very quickly. So in the Netherlands, for example, where I'm from, we have proportional representation, right? And in Germany, you have a mix of two systems, which we're not going to go into today. But proportional representation basically means the percentage of the entire country that voted for someone, or for that percentage will be translated into proportional seats in the parliament. While first past the post, if I'm not mistaken, is the whole idea of whoever gets the most votes gets the seat in that constituency, right? Or in this case, in that council. So the problem, of course, is that if one candidate would get 20% of the vote and the other 6 would get 4 would get 17, 18%, then that person would win the seat, even though 80% were against that person, right? So that is one of the issues of first past the post. And I personally, coming from the Netherlands, do prefer a proportional representation system. But again, the benefits, I think, of having a first past the post system, there are some, is that you can more clearly get massive, not coalitions, but massive majorities. The issue we have in Germany, for example, or in the Netherlands even more so, we have 15 parties in the parliament, and they all have to make massive coalitions, which slows things down. I mean, Jonas, in Denmark, you have the same thing, right? You have these big coalitions. So yeah, there's drawbacks for both. But yeah, maybe Jonas, I'll pass the ball over to you. Do you have a preference of political system, of what you think of first past the post versus where you're living? I think you're living in Denmark right now, right? How it works there.
I'm normally a proportional representation kind of guy. I see the logic in having constituency representatives, and in the UK, there's a massive culture and tradition around it. You've got your local MP or councillor or MSP, and they represent you. They don't represent anyone else in the country. They're there for you. I see the logic in that. But I think proportional representation is, generally speaking, a better system. And then maybe something like what they're doing in Wales right now, where you've got these you've got these regions where you then have proportional representation within those regions. I quite like as a system. Of course, Scotland has the most complicated out of all the local election systems that we're looking at today, where they've got the additional member system, where voters get 2 votes. On the first ballot, they vote for their constituency, MSP, or member of the Scottish Parliament. And then that's just a first past the post contest. So that's what we're looking at on the screen right now. We can see the SNP winning a lot of those. But then on your second vote, you vote for your list MSP, where it's essentially a leveler seat. So Scotland's divided into 8 regions, which you could actually click through there. Over right next to constituency, it says region. So these 8 regions, within each region, you've got 7 leveling seats to try to sort of make it more proportional. The problem with this is the system can be massively gamed. There's a lot of tactical voting. Some voters end up, having 2 votes effectively because they voted very smartly. Other people who might be, follow news less and not quite know what's a good tactical vote, they could end up effectively having 0 votes, even though they technically have 2, because they don't vote tactically for their constituency MSP or their regional MSP. So I think that is a tricky system, and so much of this election has just been people trying to advocate for specific types of tactical voting, which I think is sometimes a bit sad for democracy when that's the biggest issue on the table.
And Jonas, let's have a look at Scotland a little bit more, because that's also where you know a lot about, right? So Scotland, if I'm not mistaken, what's the biggest party usually there? Is it Labour or is it the SNP normally?
From the creation of the Scottish Parliament in 1999 through to 2007, Labour led in Scotland. And Labour is a party that oftentimes sees Scotland as sort of one of its natural heartlands. However, since 2007, the biggest party in the Scottish Parliament has been the Scottish National Party. So as I said, that's 19 years in power in Scotland. So they've sort of become the new natural main party in Scotland. Of course, in 2024, at the general election, Labour won the vast majority of seats in Scotland. So we thought that, this is the end of the SNP in Scotland. They're now going to be a minor force. Then Labour went ahead and became super unpopular. Now the SNP are back. So I think in a lot of ways, the SNP are now the new natural party in Scotland, even though it used to be Labour. Before then, it was the Liberal Party that would later become the Liberal Democrats.
So are there any surprises now? Because I think someone in the chat also mentioned that 13 seats now went to SNP, and I can see there's more yellow coming here in Scotland. Is that a surprise or is that expected?
I'd say there's one surprise so far, and that's the Shetland Islands, which is a Liberal Democrat stronghold, normally going SNP. I wouldn't say that the rest are surprises, because even though the SNP aren't doing super well in the polls compared to where they've normally been historically after a long series of scandals, well, the unionist parties are so split that they just can't muster up winning these constituencies. So I don't
Explain unionist parties. Sorry, Jonas, to interrupt you, but what are unionist parties?
So unionist parties are the anti-independence parties. So that's right. The Scottish Conservatives, Scottish Labour, Scottish Liberal Democrats, and now also Reform UK Scotland.
Okay.
So the most of these seats going SNP aren't necessarily surprises. You've got the Perthshire seats, you've got the Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire seats, you've got some of the sort of outskirts of Edinburgh. Expect some of the other Edinburgh seats to be a bit more interesting, and then you've got Carrick, Cumnock, and Doon Valley. That makes sense for the SNP. Kilmarnock makes sense, and Paisley makes a lot of sense. The one surprise, aside from the Shetland Islands, that I'm just noticing now is Banffshire and Buchan Coast, which is at the very top of the northeast. So this is an area that you might need to reload the page. This has just gone SNP, and this was a seat that pretty much every single MRP poll up until this election actually predicted for Reform UK to win. And this is an area of Scotland where the Conservatives normally do quite well. But I can just, I'm having a look at the exact details here. The SNP only won with just over 350 votes. But again, a seat is a
350 votes. That's nothing. That is nothing.
No. Over Reform UK.
Right.
So that's maybe also a little bit of a surprise. I think the SNP are surprising a bit more than expected in terms of positive for them, but not massively. Throughout this whole election, it's been less of a conversation about, what could a next government look like, but instead, what will the next SNP government look like? Because it's been so obvious that the SNP are going to form the next government.
Okay, so sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking there as well. Since it's become such a test for Labour, and you've got a lot of these Scottish voters who are wondering, okay, how do I vote against Labour, against what's been happening in terms of not just the UK, in Scotland too. I know there's a lot of national politics out of Scotland, especially the big scandals with Nicola Sturgeon, her husband, etc. But I feel like with the momentum of the country, what's been happening, and kind of the globalization of UK politics on the world scene in terms of the migration debate, the European Union, etc., especially with Trump. I think a lot of Scottish voters are probably looking at their ballot box and going, okay, do I want to vote again against the government? How do I do that? And it's either the SNP or Reform. And it looks like maybe some Conservative and Labour voters are looking at the SNP for that protest vote, given what you were talking about in terms of this being a testament for how bad Labour has been doing since it got elected just a few years ago. And I would like to get your opinion on that, Jonas, as well. But I've got a comment, €5 from Nick Trimpos. Thank you very much, Nick. Always great to see you here on the live streams, who says today's result confirms one thing. If Britain wants to return, they will have to accept harsh conditions and regulations so they don't pull a Brexit 2.0. Yes. I don't think we want a Brexit 2.0.
No, but I'm going to jump in there because, I mean, no harsher than other members, right? I think the UK had a very, very good deal when they were back in the EU, like 15 years ago. They had lots of opt-outs. When it comes to the euro, for example, also when it comes to, I can't remember, is there fishing opt? I don't know. There was quite a few opt-outs, and yeah, exactly. And there was also financial ones, I'm not mistaken, but I need to go deeper into it. And I think if they were to join again, then, well, yeah, that kind of special status is probably lost, right? That's something that we should think about. But no harsher criteria to join, if you ask me, than any of the other countries. I mean, UK would be an amazing part of the European Union, of course. And I think there's also, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
No, sorry, finish your statement. I just want to talk about the veto vote on the UK if they rejoin.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, that would be a general statement for any new country joining the European Union, is that the veto would be inactive, right? So I think we need to reform the veto with the next member joining so that these members can't hold up the entire European Union. But the great news is, and we talked about this yesterday, Paul, we almost did a live stream on this, is that Germany is starting to lobby the rest of the European Union, so other member states, to drop the veto for foreign policy. And that's a big deal because Germany obviously holds a lot of power in the European Union. And for me, this is great news. And keep an eye on our channel, because at the end of this month, there's a Foreign Affairs Council where the foreign ministers of the EU meet, and there could be some bigger news coming out around the removal of the veto. Apparently 12 countries are on board, and this could increase to more and more countries by the time that this meeting happens. So anyway, that's a bit of a slight segment into the veto. But coming back to the UK, yes, if the UK were to join the Union, it would not have a veto, but preferably no other country would have a veto either.
Yeah, I mean, this is critical. Nick is bang on. He's completely right. You cannot have the UK come in with another veto here. It would be absolutely catastrophic. And of course, I was really sad to see the UK go when there was Brexit. But we got to say the truth. Since Brexit, the EU has moved forward on many, many things that the UK did not want to be a part of. And so, yes, while it was sad and while I would love for the UK to be part of the EU again, it cannot come with the same strings attached. If the UK comes back, they need to accept that they're going to be a big part, a large part, a massive and important part of the European Union, but they're not going to be rivaling with the European Union. They're between the USA and the EU. If they decide to come back, they choose the EU, then we'll welcome them with open arms, with democracy, and not someone like Trump. But it comes at a price. It comes at a price of, okay, you lose some independence to the EU, but you gain independence from Washington, from America, right? So I think that's absolutely critical. So Nick, you're absolutely right there. And he actually left another comment for €5, which I'm just jumping to now. And maybe this one is one for you, Jonas. This is one that I've seen many on online forums, but Nick asks, why is Reform gaining ground? Why didn't angry or protest voters, instead of voting for someone like the Liberals or Greens, vote for them, the pro-EU parties or parties that are against the system, instead of the far right. And I have my own opinions on this, but I just want to take it away to you, who knows a lot about this election. Why is this happening?
I mean, I think one of the easy answers is immigration. The UK has seen a massive, massive surge in immigration, both legal and illegal immigration over the past couple of years, especially during that period of Conservative government under Boris Johnson. And I think a lot of people across the UK have really felt their communities changing dynamics right in front of their eyes over the last couple of years. It's something that you can see quite easily in your day to day. And then you've had sort of bad news story after bad news story about these migrant hotels, as they're called, places where if people come in, apply for asylum in the UK, they're held in these hotels while their asylum application is being processed. And there have been a lot of bad news stories about them then committing criminality, and the effect that that has on the local communities. A lot of very angry protests. And then I think the Southport stabbing was also a very, very big deal in shifting people massively politically on immigration. You guys may recall it was an incident where a person of another ethnic background came in and stabbed many, many young children, killing many of them, and it led to massive riots. It was a very, very tense moment in recent British history, and Reform managed to turn that into something where people saw them as the people who would solve that issue. So I think that's part of the reason. I think another part of the reason is also, to a lot of people, the Greens also seem a bit extreme, especially people of the sort of centre right, people who normally maybe vote Conservative or would be on the social right of the Labour Party. They could never see themselves voting for the Green Party. So then Reform is the best thing that they have for a protest vote. And this is interesting, there's a lot of discourse about people who aren't massive fans of Reform choosing it as sort of a lesser of many different evils. You've got people who don't think it's right enough. You see these sort of smaller parties emerge to the right of Reform. One that I think we should speak about later today, Restore Britain, will be quite interesting because they're standing elections, or they're standing candidates in very few elections, but still some. So that'll be significant today. But yeah, generally speaking, Reform UK is just the right-wing answer to being disenfranchised with the government, plus a lot of people see it as an answer to the immigration issues.
And right before we go back into looking at the results in England, because there's definitely some updates, I'll go through the last super chat from Goose Spring, who said, speaking as a Brit, I think that the UK will never vote to rejoin the EU if that means using the euro. As soon as thoughts of rejoining becomes prominent, that requirement will destroy EU support. So I can quickly answer that. Thank you, by the way, for your super chat. And yeah, you're probably right. And that is why this channel argues for a multi-tier support, multi-tier European Union, right? So the idea would be that the UK would become an associate member of the EU if it doesn't want to adopt the euro. And that associate membership could mean single market, customs union, maybe the Schengen area if the UK wants it, etc. So you'd have some aspects of the European Union, you're an associate member, but you wouldn't become a core member until, of course, you adopt the euro. And if that means that you stay in that status or in that tier of European Union membership because you want to keep the pound, then I think that's completely fine. But I think the core of the EU, one of the requirements, that's the take of the channel anyway, is adopting the euro. So yeah, that's my take to that. And now I would love to go back to the actual elections because, Jonas, there is definitely updates here because, I mean, me just looking as an outsider, I can see a lot of red popping up now here around the Manchester area. And so that meaning Labour is winning certain constituencies here, or at least councils here, right? Or what would you say about this new development around this area?
So the interesting thing, you can call it interesting or a bit annoying and confusing, but it is that a lot of councils are only electing a third of their councillors today. The UK uses a staggered system, which means that not all elections are up for election when there's local elections. They've got local elections every single year, and some councils aren't even fully up for election within that whole council, so you've only got like a third of the candidates. So I think, would you be able to click into Manchester, sort of the red sliver right there? Yeah, and scroll down a bit, and then you can click through to where it says Labour hold, right there. So then we'll see the details for Manchester if you click there.
While you guys look for that, we've got another result from SNP. SNP loses Nationalism to Labour. So it looks like some places, Labour is getting some votes, kind of holding on or even winning to some of the SNP. This is a little bit unusual. It's not really going towards the momentum. Sorry, go back to what you were doing, Jonas and Lambertus.
Yeah. Also, just on that, the Western Isles in Scotland, they went Labour with a couple hundred votes, just as you were saying, which is quite interesting. But I think it's very small communities, so it might also just be the case of the Labour guy is quite popular locally there. With these smaller contests, it's sometimes hard to make broader narratives about it nationally. But yeah, so this is the Manchester Council results, and I think this is sort of a perfect example of some of the interesting things that happen. So the Manchester City Council has 96 members of that council, but as you can see, only 32 were up for election. But then if you look at the results, councillors elected in 2026 for Labour, only 6. So they've lost 24. So that's a massive, massive loss to Labour. And Manchester is a fairly progressive city. It's very ethnically diverse. A lot of young people in Manchester. You see the Greens, they're plus 17. So they took 18 seats today. Massive, massive surge in support for the Greens in Manchester. Reform UK also on the rise in Manchester, plus 7. So this goes to say that a lot of councils, which you'll be seeing on the map, which are red, might still have massive Labour losses within them, but there was no way that Labour was ever going to lose Manchester City Council because they already had a majority of councillors who weren't up for election. So there was literally nothing that could happen today that changed the overall control of Manchester. But once you click in and you look at the details, Labour going back 24, that's massive. The Greens having a massive surge here in Manchester. And that's happening in quite a lot of places and quite a few of the other sort of council areas you were looking at just outside of Manchester before.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the map is a little bit misleading, actually. And if we go back here, so this is really for anyone joining quite recently, this right here, the overview really shows you how badly Labour is losing 369 seats so far. Conservatives, the biggest losers after that, and Reform UK, the biggest winner so far. And the Greens only up 61. So maybe that's also, I know we covered it before briefly, but for me, that almost seems a bit underwhelming concerning, because before this election, I read about a Green surge and a Reform surge, but only 61 seats compared to Reform winning 535. Is it underwhelming, or is the night not over yet, or the day not over yet, and this might increase?
We don't know yet because we're still waiting for a lot of those central London boroughs where we're expecting the Greens to do well. We're also still waiting for Birmingham, where I also expect the Greens to pick up quite a lot. So there are still some areas where the Greens could make massive gains, but it has been a narrative sort of simmering on social media. Are the Greens underperforming? Part of that could be there's been a lot of anti-Semitism controversy around the Greens over the past couple of days. A lot of council candidates who have now been excluded from the Greens, who were accused of anti-Semitism online. And you had, in response to the recent terrorist attack, where 3 people were injured in London, you had Zach Polanski post a somewhat questionable tweet that he since apologized for, where he was very quick to criticize the police in what was an anti-Semitic attack, and he then apologized. But I think that's gotten so much media coverage that a couple of people might have also then turned away slightly from the Greens because of it. However, there's also another element to this, which is expectations. And what you need to remember with English local elections is the last time that these specific seats were up for election. And the last time that these seats were up for election was in 2022, which was a time when Partygate was a massive story. It was a time when Labour were surging in the polls, and a time when the Conservatives were seeing a pretty big dip. The Greens and Reform UK weren't factors really back then. So taking that into account, and then having worked with sort of, or having looked at a bunch of different guesstimates and stuff like that, a lot of news stations have come out with these quite interesting suggestions of, well, what is a good result for the different parties? So if you don't mind, I've actually got a list here of sort of an accumulated, here's what a really good result is for these parties who are expected to go.
Gladly. Yeah. Let's hear it.
So
yeah.
A really good result for Reform is if they have a net positive of 1,600 or more. That's a really good result. I mean, we're not close to that, and we won't be close to that until very late tonight, because we're still waiting for what is it? We've got 72 out of 136 councils, so we're still waiting for a lot of results before we can say that with accuracy. But I think that's something people should keep an eye out for the future. For the Greens, a very good result for them is plus 450. So expectations are a bit lower for them. They're also, not quite as high in opinion polls as Reform, and it's not necessarily their strongest parts of the country that are up for election. See, if all of Manchester City Council was up for election, expectations for the Greens would be higher. For the Liberal Democrats, a really good result for them is plus 300. And then if we turn to the parties that are expected to do badly, for Labour, a really, really bad result where Keir Starmer would have massive questions asked is if they're net negative minus 1,500 or more. And for the Conservatives, it's net negative 850. So these are sort of the numbers to be watching out for once we reach the really late stages of results coming in. But that being said, Reform UK seem on course to at least get very close to that really good result. Labour seem on course for that really bad result. The Greens, we can't really determine yet before London and Birmingham. And the Liberal Democrats are also hard because we're still really waiting for areas like Surrey. But from people I know on the ground in Surrey, they're saying it looks good for the Liberal Democrats.
So just, very early predictions. If we're going to look at winners and losers, then the biggest winner, potentially looking at your numbers and looking at the ones on the screen, probably Reform would be the biggest winner. It looks like, and the biggest loser, obviously, Labour, especially if they hit, what was it, 1,000 net minus or something along those lines?
Net minus 1,500.
Yeah, and to be honest, considering they're already at 446 down, I'm not sure how big the councils are, but that could be possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the Greens will have to see. So maybe winner Reform UK, maybe then Liberal Democrats, and the biggest losers Labour. That's what we could maybe very flakily say is the outcome, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I know that plus 79 for the Greens still isn't super positive just yet, but they have won a mayoralty contest in a part of London, in Hackney, which is a sign that maybe once we get to those council elections in those parts of London, those more central, more cosmopolitan parts of London, that they'll really, really start surging.
Yeah, London has been classically left wing. The Greens have been up and coming there, but even Reform in Hackney is a big result there. We have a super chat from JSelf1237 with £10. Thank you so much, JSelf. Good to see you on the live stream. Who says the SNP win in Aberdeen means a parliamentary by-election since the SNP candidate was also an MP. The Tories came within 4%. So do you think that they could go up against the SNP given their falling vote? That's a good question. What do you think, Jonas?
Sorry, just really quickly before that, just to make sure that we've got it right. I think you said Reform in Hackney. It was the Greens in Hackney, but it's Reform in Havering. Reform also had a very successful council election in Havering, which is a part of East London. So both of them sort of on the rise there. Yes, so it was Scotland. You said that we were after a by-election.
Yeah, so there was a member who just won in the Aberdeen County, who's also an MP, and so it looks like there's going to be a by-election. Maybe you can confirm or deny that. I'm not sure, but this is what JSOF says, and who also says that the Tories came within 4%. So do you think they could go against the SNP, or do you think they'll still, maybe try to make some kind of deal there?
So let me just find the details here of Aberdeen.
While you look for that, I'll just go across the results. It's been a big day so far for all of you who have been joining us. We've got some results coming in from England. It looks like a reform wave across the country. They went from 2 council seats to a massive 450 and counting. So it's a big victory for them. We also have some results from, or so far at least, a big day for them. We have also some results from Scotland, where the SNP is doing quite well with 17 seats, 1 Labour seat and 1 Liberal Democrat seat. So still some ways to go, and we're still waiting for some results from Wales. We had some rumors, but I don't want to confirm or deny anything there. Do you have anything, Jonas?
Yes, yeah. So I'd missed this news story actually. Stephen Flynn in Aberdeen, Deeside and North Kincardine, he has won that seat. Now, Stephen Flynn is the leader of the Scottish National Party in Westminster. So he's effectively like the SNP's London leader. So this is a massive, massive deal because he's also someone who's spoken about quite a lot as a potential successor to the current First Minister, John Swinney. Stephen Flynn being slightly more of the socially conservative wing of the Scottish National Party. So yes, this will mean a by-election because he has been out to say that he will not have 2 seats. He's going to resign his Westminster seat, which means, yes, there will be a contest there for a by-election. Generally,
very quickly, what is a by-election for people that don't know?
Yes. So because of the first past the post voting system, there's no like natural successor if someone resigns, like you might have in a proportional representation system. So what happens then is there's a election within that constituency where an MP has just resigned. So it's a very sort of small localized election, like in the US when you have special elections. So I reckon this will be, it'll be an interesting one because of this sort of Aberdeenshire area. Are normally sort of SNP conservative marginals. There's maybe also a chance that Reform could do well there. But at the end of the day, there's probably the highest chance that the Conservatives and Reform end up sort of cancelling each other out, as was obviously the case here in Aberdeen D-side, where if you add together the Reform and Conservative vote, they would have won massively. But, you know, they were still, what is that, just over 1,000 votes short for Liam Kerr.
Splitting the vote then. So they're not looking like, this looks like another SNP candidate for whatever by-election there is.
I'd probably, if I had to put money on something, that's what I put money on. But who knows? It's not that far off that you could see maybe a bit of tactical voting.
Well, I just want to keep on going with something else that I was discussing, and I saw some articles with. I was even talking about it with you, Lambertus, and this is going to be very theoretical. So I just want to keep it a high level, especially since we don't know. You know, we were talking about Scotland potentially leaving the UK and then rejoining the EU. Now, something that's obviously not going to be for tomorrow. We know that for sure. But what's your view on this? You know, in 2029, we'll see who the new players are when it comes to the general, to the actual parliament inside of London. But if there were to be an SNP Green coalition majority in terms of leaving the UK, or even an SNP majority, and there were to be an election for an independent Scotland, what's your verdict on that? What's it looking like? Do you have any polling data? Could there be an independent Scotland? And if there were, what does that mean for the UK? I mean, it's not looking great, right? What about Wales too? They also have an independence party.
Yeah, so I mean, independence for Scotland, just practically speaking, it's very, very difficult. It would really require some sort of deal with Reform UK, maybe between the SNP and Reform UK if they get power in 2029, or it would require a situation where the parliament is so hung that the Labour Party and maybe the Greens or Liberal Democrats or whatever would need the SNP's support to form a government. And then part of that deal would probably then be, well, then you guys give us a referendum. But 2029, that election would be the first chance really of the SNP to have any real say. But even then, I struggle to see it for maybe another decade, purely just because it is up to the UK government and most parties in the UK and most prime ministers, any future prime ministers, they don't want to be the prime minister who splits up the union. They don't want to be the prime minister who loses Scotland. Sorry,
I recognize that, but one thing I'm thinking about is, you know, they're going to have quite an electoral mandate if this happens. If SNP has a majority, maybe even the Greens doing well, you know. If they do get that, if they really do get that, and the polls are looking in their favor, is another deal potentially, especially with Labour still in power till 2029, maybe a rapprochement with the EU in terms of, for example, as we were talking about Lambertus, when it comes to the single market, something that Keir Starmer has been very open to, especially the past few months. Is that something that Scotland could put pressure on into Westminster to actually, you know, pressure them to be closer to the EU as a compromise for not gaining independence or getting an independence vote, for example? Is that something on the table?
It's definitely an argument that they could try to mount. The thing is, though, it's all a question of mandates, theoretical mandates, whereas the UK government has no reason to need to rely on the Scottish government. There's no sort of system or process that requires them to listen to what the First Minister of Scotland wants. So I do struggle to see John Swinney with a renewed mandate having all that much sway over Keir Starmer, because at the end of the day, Keir Starmer doesn't really need John Swinney's support for anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
I think there is a quick update in Wales that maybe we should have a look at. So, for example, here I can see in this. Oh, here we go. So maybe, is there anything to say about this? So we have 2 seats for Reform UK, 2 for, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Plaid Cymru, and 1 for the Conservatives.
Yep. So this is really interesting. The area Cashnaid Ilwyn, something like that. I really struggle with these Welsh seats, and all of the seats in Wales now, for the first time ever, are written in the Welsh language, which is quite interesting. But yeah, so this is 2 seats for Reform UK, including Dan Thomas, who is the leader of Reform UK Wales. So he's been elected now. 2 Plaid Cymru seats, and a Labour and a Conservative. So I think there's nothing necessarily shocking about this, but it does speak to the fact that, the polls as we've been experiencing them, where it's a 2-horse race, who gets the most seats between Reform UK and Plaid, is very much where we're headed. It's interesting that the Conservatives still managed to get a seat. There were, some polls where the Conservatives were close to 0 seats, so they'll maybe be a bit happy with this. But yeah, generally speaking, this just speaks into the larger polls that we've been seeing over the past couple of months.
And what's the prediction here, Jonas? That is it Reform that will take Wales mainly the most seats, or will it be Plaid?
The very last couple of polls we've seen have Plaid with a slight edge on Reform, but it is really like a 2-horse race about who takes the most seats. But there's very little chance that Reform UK ends up leading the next Welsh government, purely just because they've got no friends, aside from maybe the Conservatives a little bit. But they would need to rely on some other parties to give them a majority, and none of the other parties want to play ball with Reform. So it's almost certain now at this point that Plaid lead the next government under Rhina Biorath, their party leader, where it's then just a question of how close are they to a majority? How many other parties do they need to form a majority? Is it just the Greens? Do they maybe also need the Liberal Democrats? Maybe also Labour? All of these 3 parties are parties that would be okay playing ball with Plaid, but they probably want certain things for it, though.
And I think it's quite interesting. Is Plaid similar to like the SNP in Scotland? Is it like it's like the Independence Party for Wales, if I understood it correctly? And they also would, I assume, want a referendum on leaving the UK. Is that what they're fighting for, or what do they mainly stand for?
Well, it's quite interesting because in a lot of ways, the 2 parties really, really look like each other. The main difference, though, is just how much and how quickly they want independence. So the SNP obviously saying that if they get a majority, they'll take that as a mandate for a referendum. Plaid have been very, very careful throughout this whole election to not speak that much about independence, actually. It's not the first thing in their manifesto like it is with the SNP. I believe it's the second thing. But Plaid have also said that they want to work towards an independent Wales. So I think first time around, they probably just want to lead a Welsh government for a bit, prove that they can do it, and then call for a referendum at some point in the later future. So there's a big sort of difference in terms of timelines for the 2 parties and the way that they see independence.
And maybe I want to go a little bit deeper into this, because why has this always been the case in the UK that there's these independence parties, or are these becoming more stronger more recently? So you had the Scottish referendum in I think 2014 or 13, something like that, exactly, and that was lost, of course. But has this been a case over the last 30, 40, 50 years that there's always been independence parties, or is this more of a recent phenomenon?
It is more of a recent phenomenon in terms of how successful they are. Both Plaid and SNP are fairly old parties, actually, and they've also moved quite a bit on where they stand. At first, the SNP weren't 100% sure they wanted independence. There were a lot of people within the party that just wanted devolution, which, the Scottish Parliament, having a Scottish government. The same with Plaid. Plaid for a while was actually much more of a party that just wanted to maintain the Scottish language and the Scottish culture that they felt was under threat. It was less about independence and more just about maintaining that Welsh culture. And it's only really been in sort of recent decades where the SNP have become as massive as they are today, and only really in the past decade, past couple of years even, that Plaid has become this massive player. I mean, they've been in the Senate, the Welsh Parliament, ever since it was founded. Also, they were a bit of a factor before it, but it's only now that they're, a serious contender to be the next governing party in Wales. So that success is a recent development. SNP have had success for a couple more decades, but still, relatively speaking, it is fairly recent.
And maybe just for the sorry, Paul, last question, then I'll get over to you again. But one last question to there, like, where do these two parties sit? So Plaid and the SNP, yes, everyone knows they stand for independence, but are they more like left-leaning, right-leaning, in the center? Who would they generally normally work with from the other parties?
Generally speaking, they're more left-leaning parties, but it's also worth noting that they're also kind of broad church parties, big tent parties. So they've got factions within them that are fairly conservative, especially the SNP. They've got quite socially conservative factions, people who would probably be reform supporters if it weren't for the independence question. So it is a lot more broad church in that sense. But generally speaking, they're both centre-left to even sometimes more left-wing parties.
I mean, from my personal experiences there, talking to a lot of people in the UK, and I appreciate this is a small sample size, so it might not be representative, but I've talked to a lot of Scots, to a lot of Welsh people, and the Brexit vote, of course, now it's less talked about. Now it's more about immigration, about the cost of living crisis, inflation, as well as you talked about, identity in Wales and Scotland too. A lot of them are still quite angry about this Brexit and the referendum where, for example, Scotland refused to leave the EU. So I think that is also playing a little bit of a part there, especially as you talk about they gain a lot of popularity these last few years. I want to jump over to some super chats that we got. Thank you very much, Adventurous Gold, for 50 Danish krona. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Who says, and this one is for you, Lambertus. Lambertus, you're the CEO of EU Made Simple. So if you got £5 million as an unconditional gift, what would you spend them on?
This is a bit of a fun question in between. My God, very difficult. But probably I would invest them in the company, right? I would invest them into EU Made Simple and set up more language channels and bigger coverage across the European Union, right? To go towards our vision of informing Europeans about the European Union and why the European Union, as annoying as it is with all of their rules and etc., is also a good thing for our continent and to represent us against all the superpowers in the world. So I think that's probably where I would put it. And I see
we got Ferrari then.
No, not really into cars, man. Even though I live in Germany, I'm not really into cars. Is that what you would get, Paul?
No. I'd spend it on the French channel, man. Yeah, that's what I would spend it. Get a nice edit.
Exactly. And this one, I'll jump on from there.
On the £5 million there, because I think it is a reference to a massive scandal right now in UK politics.
Okay. My God, I didn't see it. Now I get it. Yeah.
Because Nigel Farage, the leader of Reform UK, has come under fire the past week and a bit for having taken a massive £5 million donation right before he ran to be an MP.
From the guy from Thailand, right? From Thailand, wasn't it?
I believe so, yeah. It was definitely some quite a dodgy situation, and a lot of questions are being raised, and it doesn't appear that he quite followed the regulations he was supposed to in terms of declaring it as a donation. I don't think these stories have a massive impact on Reform UK's following or support, because I think Reform supporters are kind of getting used to it and would blame mainstream media for only going for Reform UK, but it has been something that featured quite heavily the past week in UK.
Good that we have you on to understand what these questions are about. Okay, we do have another question though. Let's move on. And this is from the Marshall. Thank you for your super chat. And he asked, can the Scottish Parliament declare independence unilaterally without a referendum? And I assume I know the answer, but over to you, Jonas.
Nope. They cannot declare independence themselves, and they can also not call a referendum themselves. in the Scotland Act of 1998, which was the act that set out the Scottish Parliament, it was very clear about which powers were devolved and which were reserved for the UK Parliament. And constitutional matters is reserved for the UK Parliament. So the short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is this has all been tried in courts recently under Nicola Sturgeon, who tried to take this to court, but all courts agreed with the sort of more traditional reading of the Scotland Act, which had this as a reserved power. So no.
Another thing that I would like to talk about is Donald Trump, right? We have been talking about him for a very long time. He's everywhere, and he's come to the UK quite a few times. He's very controversial in the UK, and there's a lot of people, saying no kings in Scotland or the EU, and that's another thing which we haven't really touched upon in this live stream, and I haven't seen much in terms of the debate inside of the UK. But I know from experience that there's a very big split in the UK between those who are maybe more pro-Trump and those who are more anti-Trump, right? I mean, a lot are more towards anti-Trump, but they're still voting for reform. And that's one of the things that Nigel Farage has had such a problem with, is being buddies with Trump back in 2024, back in 2025, when he was still popular, but now distancing himself a bit when he made his comments about, let's say, Afghanistan or some other conflicts where the UK participated with the United States in. And so I'm just wondering what you think, both Jonas and Lambertus, in terms of Donald Trump's role, at least for this election. A lot of people said the anti-Trump votes, the Greens, the Lib Dems, would skyrocket in terms of the anti-Trump, especially as Keir Starmer has been a little bit, negligent or not very careful when it comes to criticizing Trump or, working with Trump, either way. On the other hand, you've got Nigel Farage, who's still seen as a Trump ally. So has that played a large part in the British election? Is it seen that way, or is that less talked about and more of a side issue when it comes to this election?
I think generally, I'm going to slightly defend Nigel Farage here. I know this might be the wrong YouTube channel to do that on, but I think there's quite a distance ideologically between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. And I think there's also quite a distance rhetorically between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. I don't think Farage is quite as bombastic as Trump. I think he's much more careful and much more mainstream than Trump would be if he were in the UK. However, this idea of Farage being Trump's guy in the UK has definitely hurt him, especially the last couple of months with Iran, the last couple of months with the Afghanistan comments that he made. Things like that have had some impact on Reform UK. And we've also seen them slightly dip in polls over the last couple of weeks and months. And I think a big part of that is probably Iran and, Trump becoming more and more bombastic than he has even previously been. So it will be something that features. And I think once we start getting closer and closer to the next general election, get ready for all the other party leaders to start referring to Farage as Trump's best pal. Because that will work. It will be very, very effective. Trump is not popular in the UK. Generally speaking, he will have fans, but generally speaking, he is not popular in the UK.
But they tried to do this for this election, right? And it doesn't, from a first glance, at least, doesn't seem to have worked.
Farage gets to own a lot of the narrative right now. So they have, I don't think other party leaders have been quite as able to try to do it. But there's also a limitation. Starmer can't go out and say that because that could massively impact relations between the UK and the US. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservatives, can't say that because she's fairly close to people within the Trump sphere. The Liberal Democrats, and they've been doing it for a while, but they're really struggling with getting time on the TV because they're just kind of uninteresting. They don't have scandals, but they also don't have power. So they're not getting that much time on the telly. But the Greens have been trying to push it as well. But I think once Farage becomes the prime ministerial candidate, it'll be hyped up. There'll be more focus on it. But this is also, local issue. It's supposed to be local issues that have been discussed up to this election.
I mean, also on this case, I do sympathize a little bit with Starmer, right? Because Friedrich Merz, I'm not sure if you saw the news, but he basically went to a school, literally in front of school children, and the children asked him about Iran. And he basically said, well, the US has no plan of what they're doing. It's no strategy. It's not going the right way, that kind of thing. And as a result of those statements, which he said in German, Trump has been hitting Merz for like a week now. He's kind of moved away attention from Starmer and Spain and now moved to the German chancellor, right? So I do, and I mean, a couple of consequences, 25% tariff is now threatened on the car industries again, and the removal of 5,000 American troops from Germany, right, which has now been announced. So I do understand that leaders of countries need to be very careful at this point in time anyway. And Paul, you might disagree here because you're like, rip off the Band-Aid, we need to cut support from the US. But especially the German media has been very, very skeptical about Merz, of how stupid he was to say things like that. And I think Starmer is in a very similar boat, and so are all the other leaders in the European Union.
I mean, from that perspective, for me, it's I really think that this help that we have, or quote unquote help that we have from the United States, has been two-sided. Yes, I would love for them to be in NATO. I would love for them to continue their support. I would love for them to be our ally. But I also do think that it's been also on our side, being so reliant on the United States has basically made us complacent and not allowed us to look at other horizons. And when I look at this from an electoral perspective, everyone who is so-called against Trump, against what he's been doing when it comes to fighting Europe, fighting NATO, being Greenland, his war in Iran. Every leader, such as Pedro Sanchez, who's gone out and actually condemned those actions, has had massive popular support. Most people in the EU are against Donald Trump and his actions. If they speak out, if they ride that wave instead of being so scared to speak up, then they're going to be punished electorally. It's going to happen. You see that coming from the left. You see that coming from even far right parties such as Marine Le Pen, who have spoken against Donald Trump because they want to ride that wave of popularity of anti-Trumpism. So I would be also, on that side of the spectrum where, of course, we would love to have the United States as our ally. They're a great ally to have, especially the UK. They need them since they've been between Washington and Brussels, or Washington and the EU, for a very long time now. And eventually they're going to have to choose, right? And I believe it's in their best interest to choose the EU instead of the US, which has shown, via MAGA Republicans, that they're maybe not the most reliable partner.
Taking the conversation back to the election, Jonas. So quickly, and while I agree with you, Paul, I think I just want to see if there's any updates in the current results. And reform is just going up, which is to be expected. And now we have 75% or 75 of the 136 councils counted. Is there any news regarding the last half an hour of what happened, Jonas, in the election?
Yeah, well, if we start in England, I think something that's quite interesting is we're getting the first couple of results from Birmingham, where in Birmingham, we are right now seeing Reform on the incline. They've got 7 councillors, a net positive of +7, and we're seeing the Greens pick up a bit of steam there as well. So this is just further proof of this narrative of Reform UK, and the Greens are going to do very, very well. They're picking up seats everywhere where they should be picking up seats. Birmingham's one to really watch because you've got 101 councillors there. It's the whole council up for election. So it's very, very interesting and exciting what goes on there. Another interesting one that caught my eye is Cambridge. So Cambridge, which is, yeah, exactly, the sort of small little enclave there in the larger Cambridgeshire. See that Green vote there? I think you've got South Cambridgeshire. If you click through to the very small little grayish one in the middle, there you go. So Cambridge, obviously a big university area, a lot of young students there. You can see that reflected too. Greens +6. That's exactly the type of numbers that Greens want to be picking up in the types of areas where they really want to be picking up seats.
So I guess Greens is all about young people, right? It's mainly young people voting Greens, university students, that kind of thing.
Yes, that and areas of a lot of ethnic minorities. So parts of Manchester and Birmingham, these very, very sort of diverse parts of cities. The Greens do very, very well in those areas too. And that's what we saw at the Gorton and Denton by-election earlier this year as well, where the Greens won in a little bit of a surprise to a lot of people.
And I mean, we always do connect it to the EU, as you're noticing, Jonas, in this live stream. So if we think about the EU for a second, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats are the ones in favor of a lot more stronger relationship with the EU, right? While Labour is moving there, the Greens and Liberals are the most. Would that be the correct analysis?
Totally accurate. I'd also include the SNP and Plaid Cymru in those very, very
Right.
pro-EU parties. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. And then if we go back to the map of the UK, one sec, of England, there's not that many other results that came in. I mean, London, a couple are coming in now.
Yeah, I actually think most of those have been there since this morning. Something interesting, if you click over on County Council, so county councils are these sort of large creations that exist in this when you've got these two-tier systems, and you've got both Essex and Suffolk right over there on the east, and both going massively to reform. This happened a few hours ago, but I think this is also where reform are picking up a lot of seats in these. They're very rural areas. They're very socially conservative areas. You've got, in some parts of them, a lot of farmers, but you've also got smaller towns.
I mean, look at that, 41.
Exactly.
That's insane. Okay.
Part of that is obviously also a product of first past the post voting. So county councils are split into wards, so like smaller voting districts. And in each ward, there'll be 1 to 3 councillors. And then see if you elect 3 councillors, you get 3 votes. If you vote reform, you're obviously just going to go in and vote for the 3 reform candidates. So it's essentially your standard first past the post.
I mean, you can see where the votes are coming from, right? It's the Conservatives losing lots of seats here, -40 and +41. I mean, it's a direct, if I look at it, transfer of Conservative voters to Reform UK in Suffolk.
Mm-hmm.
And is that, I mean, again, going a little bit into detail, is that because Badenoch is just super unpopular, or is that because Reform is just so popular? What is the reason for this transfer of votes?
Well, Badenoch has actually been experiencing a little bit of a renewed surge in support for her. So it is much more that just Reform is really popular. People soured on the Conservatives a while ago. Some of them are maybe trickling back now that Badenoch has started becoming a much better debater in parliamentary questions, for example. But it's still a case of people left the Conservatives a while ago. This is now a chance for them to show it to the big wig politicians.
And keeping with the Conservatives for a second, is Badenoch's position also in danger, depending on how this election goes, or not so much?
If you asked me a year ago, I would have said that she was on her way out within a couple of months, but that's obviously not happened. She has massively strengthened her position as leader of the party over the past couple of months. Mixture of she's become more recognizable. She has started performing better, but also there's been a little bit of a positive shift for the Conservatives in polls. It's nothing massive, but people are picking up on it. And Badenoch, in terms of popularity, is herself actually growing in terms of becoming one of the more popular, net popular, that is, leaders in the UK. So she's pretty safe, I reckon, for a while. And Conservative supporters recognize that this isn't her doing. This is the product of people leaving the Conservatives a while ago.
Right. I mean, even here, also Essex, like you mentioned, right? Reform +53. Oh my God. Conservatives -41. So literally Reform sweeping these areas.
Yeah. We've also got a bit more of a picture getting painted in Wales now.
Oh, okay. Let me go to Wales. 1 second. Let me go to Wales. Here we go. Oh yeah, there's another. Yeah.
Pennebront bro Morgannog, I think.
Good pronunciation.
I've been practicing these for a couple of days, but they're still rough, I'm sure.
For the live stream, right, Jonas?
Well, exactly, genuinely. But here we see the same narrative unfolding. 2 Plaid seats, 2 Reform seats, 1 Conservative, 1 Labour. We've again got this, neck and neck race between Plaid and the Reform Party. So really, really interesting. I am not 100% sure. I might actually do a little bit of Googling, but in terms of whether something like the Green Party is underperforming, I'd be quite interested just to check now. I'm just going to have a look at some MRP polling and to see where the Greens were expected to do well.
No problem. Just very quickly, just give you an overview to people that might have just joined. So here we are looking at Wales. So Plaid has 4, Reform has 4, Conservatives 2, Labour 2, but there's still a lot to be counted. And if we go to England, I mean, here I think nothing has changed. No, Reform's still the biggest winner at the moment, and just Labour almost down 500 now. And if we look at Scotland, yeah, we have the SNP currently absolutely killing it, having 26 seats but up one, and Conservatives down one and Labour up one. So yeah, quite an interesting overview.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big night for reform. Sorry, go ahead, Jonas.
No,
I
no,
interrupted.
you go ahead.
Yeah, it's a big night for reform, a big day for reform, actually. I mean, this is, I think this is the start of a potential swing towards what people will call the far right with regards to reform UK, and potentially a swinging from what we thought was going to be a realignment towards the EU with under Starmer, or potentially the Greens doing well. Potentially not. Maybe it's going more towards the United States. So for those of you who are European, who are looking at these results, this might be a test for Starmer that brings it over to the US rather than the EU.
But then again, Paul, maybe a question for you too. Like, I mean, yeah, we had Labour. It was supposed to be a reconnect with the EU, but did we really get that? I mean, other parties like the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, they seem to be a lot more open with actually integrating with the EU again. And they are doing well. We don't know yet, but they are looking to do well. So maybe that would be a net win for the EU, or how would you see it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see it that way. I do see what you mean in terms of definitely the Liberal Democrats and the Greens have shown to Labour that being pro-EU pays off, right? And now that they're getting more votes, they talked about more on the UK scene. So it's great to see them have this pro-EU stance and being rewarded for that. But Reform UK have just doubled down on the whole Brexit issue and have doubled down on anything that goes anti-EU. They want to leave the ECHR. They've been very critical of EU settled status. I know at some point there was on their manifesto, which they removed, there was an idea of revoking some of the EU settled status, which I myself hold. Workers who go to the UK, who pay their taxes there, who come from the EU, makes it easy for them to go there and work there. They wanted to revoke that at some point. Now they did go back with that promise of revoking some of the EU settled status visas or statuses, but it's hard to see this as anything other than a reorientation towards a more pro-Brexit party. I don't know what you think, Lambertus.
Yeah, I mean, yes, you are right. But isn't it, and again, I don't know the answer to this, but I think one of the reasons reform is also so popular is not because people want more Brexit and more isolation, but rather they're so unhappy with the current situation, right? Whether that's Labour, but also the Conservatives. Because I think, Jonas, you also mentioned it, that Reform UK is also part of a protest vote, right? Or how would you see that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think the vast majority of people who are voting for Reform UK are voting that way because they're thinking, "Oh, I'm really scared that we're going to be a part of the EU again." It is much more immigration. It's also frustration with the main parties about cost of living and about bad infrastructure and high streets that seem to be totally empty and unoccupied. It's all of these sort of smaller issues that you feel very much day to day that just make people frustrated with the current status quo, and Reform UK is an excellent outlet for that as a voter.
Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
had a look at some stuff in Wales. So as it looks right now, I'd say a slight underperformance for the Green Party in Wales, because some MRP polling had them winning the Cashenwood Islwyn seat, the sort of eastern one of the two that have been announced, where they didn't get any. So this will be interesting because the Greens have never been elected to the Welsh Senedd. So we're still waiting to see that first Green MS, as they're called, member of the Senedd elected. The two Greens there being Plaid MSs, not Green Party MSs. So that will be quite interesting. And I also saw that there's been a massive series of results in Scotland, which could be interesting to have a look at. So,
yes, the blue, right? Conservatives, look at that.
Yeah, so these are two Conservative safe seats, though. It's Galloway and West Dumfries, and it is Dumfriesshire. These are Conservative strongholds. There was worry within the Conservative Party that they would be lost due to a split in the vote with Reform, and that would then mean that the SNP would win. But instead, the Conservatives have held on pretty well there. And I think something I'm finding a lot in the data as I look closer to it is the fact that a lot of unionists, these anti-independence parties and their voters are voting very, very smartly and tactically for some of the more traditional parties instead of reform when it comes to the first vote to maintain the unionist MSPs who currently sit there as incumbents. So that seems to be the case in both of these seats. But one case where that didn't work is Eastwood, which is always a really important seat. So if you zoom into Glasgow, right there, and then you see the sort of yellow thing that sticks up from that other wave of yellow stuff. If you go down further south, there you go, Eastwood. Oh, you had it right before. Amazing. So Eastwood has been a Conservative seat for the last few cycles. Former party leader Jackson Carlaw, he's just lost that seat to the SNP. So that's a Conservative loss. And you can quite easily see that's a split in the vote. Labour splitting the Unionist vote, Reform, and even the Liberal Democrats featuring a little bit. So much of Scottish politics is tactical voting. It's, are you pro-independence? Are you anti-independence? And who is the smartest anti-independence or pro-independence party to vote for?
But this is the problem with first past the post, right? This shows you the problem, because I mean, only 33% voted for this person, and they basically, because of that, because they're number one, they won 100% of the seats.
Mm-hmm.
Right
now, of course, Scotland has that sort of leveling element of the second vote.
Okay.
But there's still, it does turn so much of the contest into tactical voting, because then it's, who should I vote for on the constituency? Who should I vote for on the regional? If I vote for this on the constituency, I'm wasting my vote with this on the regional. And you sort of end up playing all of these mathematical games instead of just voting for parties you support.
Crazy. Okay, and then anything else from Scotland if we go back? So I think
we're seeing a lot of other seats. If you look at Fife, which is the sort of just north of Edinburgh.
North of Edinburgh, Fife. Okay.
These are generally sort of safer seats. So it's the Mid Fife and Glenroth, for example, Cowdenbeath, Dunfermline. Some of these seats, exactly there you've got Cowdenbeath. These are seats that were expected to go SNP, but now sort of seeing them cement themselves as SNP seats just goes to further confirm what I think all of the polling was suggesting, which was the SNP are going to win the vast majority of constituencies, and they're going to maybe not get a majority, but they're going to get very, very close to majority, and they are going to lead the next government. I really, really struggle to see anything else happening at this point.
Okay, so you're saying they're going to get an absolute majority?
I'm saying there's a chance of it. That was sort of their whole campaign pitch was, we need 65 seats. That's a majority, just the SNP. They can't lose too many of the constituency seats before that's impossible for them, but that's their hope and their plan. But I mean, the likeliest situation is they get sort of high 50s maybe, and then they make up for the last couple of seats needed for a majority.
I mean, let's have a look at the overall results. I mean, how many do they have now? So they have, oh no, that's Wales. 1 second, I need to go to Scotland. So Scotland, I wish there was a better link for that. I need to, 1 second. Here we go. So 31 they currently have. So you're saying they need to get over 50, right? Or 50, how many do they need?
65 for a majority.
65. Yeah. Well, looks possible.
Doesn't look possible.
And Jonas, what's your view here? I mean, we were talking a lot about if there's a majority for some of the pro-independence parties, it's going to be a statement in and of itself. But the direction it's going in, it's looking very good for the SNP. We still don't know if the Greens have had a seat yet. It's still on 0 there. But at what threshold would this be a very solid result for, or even a better than expected result for the SNP or pro-independence parties more generally?
I think 60 plus seats for the SNP is a good result. The problem that they've sort of set is that they've put so much into arguing for an SNP majority that if they fall short, they're going to need to work to turn it into a victory, which it still is, though. This is a party that's been in government 19 years. If they hold over 60 seats, that's massive for them. Kudos to them. But yeah, a good result, I think, over 60 seats. Just on the Greens, because the Greens have never won a constituency seat in Scotland before. However, they're currently contesting, I'd say, 3 seats quite closely, where I'm hearing from people on the ground saying that the Greens could actually win their first constituency seats in Scotland, which would be a massive deal. And of course, when we look at those numbers, SNP with 31, Conservatives with 2, Liberal Democrats with 2, 0 for Reform, 0 for Greens, that's not accurate in any meaningful way, in the sense that there will be levelling seats that are added to this once that second ballot is counted too. And then Reform UK will massively spike upwards. They're going to do very well on those levelling seats. The Conservatives will spike upwards a bit, so will Labour, and the Greens are natural sort of levelling seat parties.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I feel like a lot of constituencies already have their representatives, and so they're going to be, closer to the electorate, and it's easier for them to win some seats. I made a little bit of a poll in the chat there, so I'm just going to end it now. But we have some of the results. Who would you vote for? We have 62% of our people watching that would vote for the Greens, the Liberal Democrats, or other, maybe the SNP or some Welsh parties there. So, a little bit of a barometer there. Then we have Reform with 24% of the people watching who would vote for Reform, 9% for Labour, and 5% for the Tories. So the Tories having a bad night, at least on our live stream, but also in real life, I guess. It's not looking very good. I also want to ask you, Jonas, what do you think about some of these scandals that we had? Nicola Sturgeon, her husband, these were massive news. I remember when I was living in Glasgow, that's all people were talking about for a very, very long time. There was a police raid on her house. I mean, has that affected the vote? Because it looks, so far, as you said, we've only counted some of these seats, and we still have the second poll or second ballot to count. But it doesn't seem like they were punished very hard.
No. So the last period of government for the SNP has been very, very messy. The ship has very much been steadied now by John Swinney, but we came in 2021, and some of the first, Nicola Sturgeon resigns not all that long after that election. We then later find out that she's under investigation from the police. She's then arrested by the police. Her husband is now being charged with embezzlement for funds from the SNP, or her now former husband. They've been divorced. Then her successor, Humza Yousaf, he breaks up this deal that the SNP have with the Greens in a bit of a crazy publicity stunt, where I don't know if he realized that would mean that he loses his majority, but then he sort of had to come out days later and say, well, I guess I don't have a majority now, so he had to resign. And then after him, John Swinney has sort of steadied the ship. But this all came with the sort of the scandals of the previous parliament as well. Alex Salmond, who was one of the very prolific torchbearers of Scottish independence, he was accused of sexual assault, and he ended up in a massive rift with Nicola Sturgeon about, whether the government was helping prosecute him, what kinds of information they were sharing with the court case. So that was a massive split as well, and that's something that's sort of been underlying in the SNP for years. You've had a lot of people leave for a party that Salmond founded some years ago called Alaba. So it's been very, very chaotic for the SNP, but they're really reaping the benefits of Reform UK coming in and splitting the vote. Because if you go in and you look at the results that they're getting, most seats that they're winning, they're actually going down decently in vote share. I'm looking at Bathgate just now, for an example, just outside of Edinburgh, but you can pick any seat you want, more or less, any yellow seat. So let's see. Let's see if the Edinburgh Southern. Yeah, you see they're minus, what is that, 7%, just shy of 7%. And that's one of the better holds that they have, actually. They're going down percentage-wise, but the other parties are splitting the vote so much that, they're still safe. And this is something you've seen in the polls. The SNP sort of has a big dip around the time when all of these scandals start emerging, but then they've sort of sustained a pretty steady course ever since then. And Labour have gone down, the Conservatives have gone down, Reform have gone up, but not up enough to be a real threat to the SNP. So it's been really, really interesting that you can have a party sort of with that many scandals and with a big polling dip who's still as successful as the SNP are right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that. I mean, it looks like Reform has managed to mobilize a lot of voters who hadn't firstly voted before, and also have mobilized a lot of the electorate that has come from the Conservative Party, which has just, as you said, completely split the vote. The Conservatives, who might have had a lot more votes in Scotland, but Reform, who's been very anti-Scottish independence, right? So that's definitely pushed voters towards the SNP, or at least, as you say, split the vote, and where people who will always vote for a Scottish independence would vote for the SNP. Reform has been more aggressive towards that. So it's definitely interesting there.
Yeah, I think something else interesting about Reform is that it's not normally just Conservative voters. There's a big sort of pipeline from a former Labour voter to Reform, because Reform appealed to some of the sort of same working class elements of a lot of areas. Because I mean, a lot of Labour is and has been socially conservative. It has been working class people who don't want to see high levels of immigration, who aren't too happy with seeing like social liberalization policies, but have been okay with it because Labour has promised some economic elements that they've been very happy with. But now Reform is just sort of winning the argument against Labour, and mobilizing former Labour voters as well. I was just looking at one seat here, Motherwell in Wishaw, which is in what you'd call the Central Belt in central Scotland, where you can quite clearly see that Reform are taking both Labour voters and Conservative voters, and maybe even, if you zoom in, it's sort of in the middle of a bunch of light grey. If you go down south a bit, there you go, Motherwell and Wishaw, where you see Reform up 20%, Conservatives only down 7.1%. That vote's coming from somewhere else. It's coming from Labour, and it's probably also to an extent coming from that lost SNP vote. So you see that it's a party that's pulling from all different angles and different sides. There will be SNP voters going Reform as well. As I mentioned, SNP actually has a pretty big, strong, socially conservative faction within the party. They're probably considering going with Reform. So it's really, really fascinating that Reform is becoming a catch-all party in some instances.
I mean, it's a phenomenon we're seeing across Europe, though, isn't it? Because I mean, even in Germany, the SPD, which is like the Labour Party in Germany, they're losing voters to also the AfD, right? Which you would think would be very strange to have a center-left party losing voters to a far-right party, the AfD, right? But it's happening. And I think other countries are doing the same thing. And I think, Jonas, I would love to ask you on this, because I think in Denmark, they've taken a different approach where, or at least the Social Democrats in Denmark, they've taken some topics, which are normally topics that the right-wing parties would be taking on, and made it kind of their own. I mean, one being immigration. So my question here would be, what is the learning that Labour needs to take, like Social Democrats in Europe needs to take? Do they need to actually address some of the issues like immigration, that is where key voters of theirs are moving to the far right for, and move towards right-leaning policy there? Or should they stay strong and stay in the left box? I mean, what is the best strategy here? Because Denmark is taking a different approach than, for example, the UK or Germany is.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because you do one thing, you lose voters on one side, and you gain voters on the other. But yet Denmark has the Social Democratic Party here did move quite rightwards on immigration, becoming arguably one of the most rightwards parties on immigration, leapfrogging some of the center-right parties. And they had a lot of success with it, especially early on. It led to almost the death and collapse of the Danish People's Party. But now you see the Danish People's Party just moving further to the right and having success with that. So maybe it just becomes sort of a cycle of, well, then if everyone just starts moving to the right, there's always going to be a party that tries to move further to the right than you. Not really sure. I mean, that story's not done being written yet. But one thing I do know is that the Labour Party in the UK have actually looked quite a lot to Denmark and the Social Democrats in Denmark for inspiration on this. You had quite a handful of Danish politicians were invited to speak to several Labour Party conferences in sort of closed door rooms, where the idea was, well, how do we adopt this hardline immigration policy from the Danish Social Democrats over to the Labour Party in the UK to fend off Reform? So that's definitely the direction that Labour is headed, both under Keir Starmer, but also the current Home Secretary who's responsible for immigration policy in the UK, Shabana Mahmood, who is what you call a member of the blue faction of Labour, which is the socially right wing. faction of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing this trend as well when it comes to the far right in France, the RN. A lot of left-wing voters going from Jean-Luc Mélenchon to Marine Le Pen. But this is not a stream about French politics. It's definitely British politics, and that brings us nicely to Restore Britain, something we mentioned very quickly at the start of this live stream. Who, as you say, there's always going to be someone who tries to outright you, right? And that would be Restore Britain in this sense. We've not seen them on this chart. They're not there. Maybe they've won an independent seat. I'm not sure. But what's it looking like for Restore Britain? Are they having some momentum? And what's the deal with them?
Yeah, so Restore Britain is a right-wing party that sort of emerges from a man called Rupert Lowe, who was elected in 2024 as an MP for Reform, but he ends up in massive internal rifts with Nigel Farage, with Sia Youssef, Lee Anderson, other figures within Reform UK. He then leaves, and then some years go by, and then he ends up founding Restore Britain. After he'd also founded like a smaller localized party that's now been sort of absorbed by the greater Restore Britain, a smaller localized party called Great Yarmouth First, because he's an MP for what's called Great Yarmouth. Now, he'd initially said that he wanted to stand local councillors all across England for this contest. However, he then changed his mind, saying, he didn't have the capabilities to vet all of these candidates, to build the infrastructure, whatever. So he's only standing in Great Yarmouth in his own home turf. So we need to, really zoom in on a very, very small part of the country to get a sense of it. But it is a big enough story that I think it warrants that, because if there's a threat from the right to reform, does that mean they're going to have to move more rightwards? Does that mean that all of a sudden there's a new party that we're going to have to start to think of in the UK political context? Or is this maybe just a figure who mostly exists online? He's very popular on Twitter. The party's very popular on Twitter. But does that, really translate to anything in real life? So if we hop into looking at county council elections, because Great Yarmouth, any smaller council entity of it, is not up for election, but the county council where it's placed in is, and that's over there, Norfolk, over on the east, the one light grey. So you were just over it a second ago. There, you slightly to the right. There you go. So we still don't have results for this county council, but this is the place to watch if you're watching out for Restore Britain. So we're still going to have to wait to see what happens with that.
A lot of voters who now vote for reform, I say a lot of voters, a lot of people I know who are inside of politics who were very happy to vote for reform, but feel a bit betrayed by Farage in terms of some of the comments where he walked back on some of his very anti-immigratory policies, right? Where he said he would not be expulsing certain immigrants with ILR, or reassessing some of the foundation, like some of the treaties in terms of immigration in the UK. He walked. I don't know the exact ones. I'm not professional in this, but he walked back on some of his immigration promises, and who have moved to reform, to Restore UK. Is this something, if there's a win here for Restore UK? Is this a big signal to just Farage, or is this a signal to the wider UK political spectrum that they should move more rightwards? Since, if already Reform is doing so well, but Restore UK is going to be doing even better, maybe they're all going to be switching a bit more right-wing, especially on immigration, as we talked about with Denmark on immigration.
Yeah, we've already seen a little hint of Reform trying to ward off against Restore by moving rightwards. In a very controversial policy announcement, I think a week ago, Sia Youssef, who's the shadow Home Secretary for Reform UK, he came out with a policy where he said any constituency who votes for a Green MP or MSP or MS in Scotland or Wales, those constituencies are where we're going to place centres for deportation centres for migrants who are being forced to be deported from the UK. Obviously, very, very unpopular. Obviously a lot of news stories, both in the UK and other countries with deportation centers about a lot of crime in that area. So this almost sort of threatening people against voting for the Greens, because if you vote Green, you're going to live next to a deportation center, is a massive shift for Reform UK on rhetoric. It's a big shift for them on policy, and sort of breaking political norms. So I think we're already seeing that rightward shift from them.
Yeah, I mean, I had seen that as well, more on immigration. Very controversial in the UK. You had this massive protest as well with over 1 million people in London very recently in terms of an anti-immigration protest, and this is something you see kind of everywhere in the EU. But to recap, for those who are just joining us, you have 3 elections going on. You have in England, you have the council election, which it looks like Reform is doing really quite well. Well, you have several elections in England. You also have elections in Scotland for the Scottish Parliament, which we have some results coming in. The SNP looking like they've got a good day ahead for them. And we also have an election in Wales as well, in terms of their own parliament, who have switched voting system. Before they had 60 MPs, now they have 96, 16 per 6 regions. And there too, it looks like Plaid Cymru is going to get the lead. But I'm just looking at the results now. Reform UK with 11 seats. What does this mean?
Big update, I think.
Yep. So big stuff has happened in Wales. You've got Plaid and Reform still contesting for first place, but I think now Plaid's taking a slight lead. That's also partially due to the places that have been counted. I just want to preface it by saying, because we're looking at some of Cardiff coming in, Cardiff, of course, being more socially liberal than other parts of Wales. We've also got a news story in the fact that the Greens have their first ever member of the Senate, a man called Anthony Slaughter, who is the leader of the Welsh Greens in the constituency called Cardiff Penarth, which is a part of Cardiff, down there at the south part of the country.
Yeah, just let me do a reset. 1 second. There we go. So here at the bottom, here the dark green in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, here.
So that is.
Oh, there we go.
Neighboring. There you go. So this is one of the Cardiff seats. We've got the first ever Green member of the Senate. So the question will be whether we get more of these, or if Anthony Slaughter is the only one. I reckon we're probably due a couple more if polls do hold up. But that's massive news story for Wales, which is now becoming a 6-party country. An interesting little story about Wales, actually, because they this is the first time Reform UK has been elected in Wales, but it's not the first time that a Nigel Farage project has done well in Wales. Back in the 2016 Welsh Senate election, UKIP actually won, I believe it was 7 seats. A story that sort of gets forgotten in political history, but UKIP served for a whole period of Parliament as a decently big faction within the Welsh Senate. They ended up falling apart, massive internal rifts, and they all hated each other by the end of it. And by the end of that Parliament, not a single one of them still sat as a UKIP member. But for people watching Welsh politics, that's quite important to understand the current formation of Reform UK Wales, because so many of those same people who were involved in the UKIP project in Wales are now involved in Reform UK Wales. So there's a lot of sort of rifts and tensions that still exist, but there's also more experience, even if it was bad experience, at least it's understanding of the Parliament and stuff like that in a way that you won't see in Scotland and you won't see in a lot of the council areas in England either.
And that's actually... very quickly. So I remember UKIP back in the day, right? Then Farage reinvented himself and went to the Brexit party, and then there's been another reinvention now with Reform UK. Why have we had so many different parties, and why are they so successful now and not before?
Yeah, so UKIP was that was sort of his first big project. He wasn't actually the founder for UKIP; it was a Liberal Democrat back when UKIP was just sort of an anti-EU party. But Farage takes over UKIP, it makes it massive. But then after the Brexit referendum, he sort of puts up his hands, says, "I'm done. I've done what I wanted to do in politics. I've forced Brexit through." So he steps down as leader for UKIP. But then his successors turn very, very right-wing to a point where he's very, very uncomfortable. Someone like Tommy Robinson is brought in as an advisor, and Farage then leaves the party in protest, saying, "I'm not comfortable with the direction of this party." He then founds the Brexit Party once, Brexit negotiations were turning into an absolute nightmare for everyone, as a protest vote to say, let's just get this done. The Brexit Party then actually becomes the Reform Party today. So Reform UK today is the Brexit Party. It's the same party. It's just been rebranded. He leaves the project. He goes, works in business, earns a lot of money. But then ahead of 2024, Reform UK is getting a bit of traction. A lot of Conservatives are tired of the very high rates of immigration coming out from the Conservative-led government. So they start seeking and looking towards Reform UK, which at that time is led by Richard Tice. Richard Tice then steps down as leader to let Farage back into UK politics in this massive announcement during the 2024 UK general election, which then, leads us to where we are today, which is Nigel Farage leading Reform UK, Richard Tice now serving as his deputy leader. Farage has a very, very good instinct in terms of knowing when there's something going on in British politics that he can tap into. He could sense there was something with Brexit. He helped build that excitement, but he also sort of had very good timing, knowing when to come in. And now in 2024, he again saw a really good opportunity for a project like Reform to become massive. He stepped in just at the right time, where his stepping in as leader also massively boosted the party in polls, because people didn't know who Richard Tice were, but they knew who Nigel Farage is. So he's got that impeccable timing. He knows how to tap into something. He's a very, very gifted politician. Love him or hate him. I think it's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I remember seeing him every single day on the front page. But I'm also thinking about on the chat, people are saying, this is a protest vote. Is this a protest vote? Are we going to see this in the next general election? Or, the people are hoping that it's going to be just a protest vote. I don't think this is a protest vote. I think this is a new reality of the UK. I think successive British governments, Labour, the Tories, have ever since Brexit really dropped the ball on anything that's related to the UK politics and foreign policy. I mean, it's hard to find many wins for some of the British governments that we've had since 2016. There's very few of them, apart maybe Boris when he managed to get Brexit through. He did his deal, but the whole thing with Theresa May, David Cameron, Boris Johnson finally getting the deal through. Then you had Boris Johnson, who fell after COVID, and then you had a prime minister who lasted less amount of time than a lettuce head. So I feel like it's very difficult for the UK to get many wins, increasing public spending, increasing public debt, and low growth. So, I don't think this is a temporary protest vote against Labour that's going to magically turn around in 2029. I strongly believe, and I want to have your opinion, Lambertus, as well as yours, Jonas. Maybe you, Lambertus, first. Is this where we're heading? Is this the new reality, not only in terms of the UK, but elsewhere in Europe, for governments who have, or traditional governments who have failed to properly address citizen needs?
I mean, I can only agree with you, Paul. I think, if it's a new reality, I'm not sure. I think there's plenty of voters who just are convinced by these parties, so that, they will continue to vote for Reform UK, and the same in Germany for AfD, the same in France for RN. But I do think there's also a lot of voters, like workers, which we talked about before, that are moving to these parties because, like you mentioned, they're so frustrated with the current government, right? And I know that's the case in UK, 100% that's the case in Germany. And I think it's really a shame that the center parties, the center left and the center right, are failing so hard at addressing the normal needs of people, right? And I don't know. I do think if for example, Labour would make an impact, maybe with a new prime minister, and I think that's something we need to talk about also, like who could this next prime minister be? If they are able to make an impact and actually improve people's lives, I do think a lot of voters would come back, or go back to Labour, or go back also to the Conservatives at some point. But of course, not all. And that leads me to my next question. I think, like, what is the future for Labour? If the Labour result is so bad, what can Labour do in the mandate they have left, which is, I think, 2029, right, is the next election? What can they do, or who can become the new prime minister, and what can they do to turn this all around? And maybe let's start with the first one, Jonas. Who are the actual people that could replace Keir Starmer?
Yeah, so there are effectively sort of four main candidates at this point. I'll very quickly go through them. We already talked about Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, the most popular politician in the UK by net approval rating. He's sort of the soft left of the Labour Party. His big problem is he's not an MP. You have to be an MP or a member of the House of Lords to be prime minister. So he'd first need to win a seat in a by-election. That's very difficult. The other main contender, I think, is Angela Rayner, who's the former deputy prime minister. She served as deputy prime minister in Starmer's first year in government. Her problem is that she had to resign for a reason, and that was a tax dodging scandal where she didn't pay the appropriate amount of stamp duty on a property that she bought, and she hadn't sought the legal advice that she should have. So she had to resign. That scandal's still not been sorted. She still hasn't paid that tax. That's not been settled. That'll be a massive problem for her. But she's also of the soft left. She actually used to be of the Corbyn left, but she's moved slightly more to a mainstream soft left. Then you've got, well, perfect. Those are the four I wanted to talk about. Nice. Wes Streeting, he is the health secretary. He is much more moderate. He's very much of like the Tony Blair type of, centrist policy, third way. His problem is he was super close to Peter Mandelson, which is, of course, a big problem for Starmer. That will be a big problem for Wes Streeting. And he's also got the added problem of, well, part of why Keir Starmer is unpopular is because of his policies. Wes Streeting has the same policies. He is a centrist. And then the fourth, Ed Miliband, who is a former leader of the party. He contested a general election against David Cameron, which he lost. He's also of the sort of soft left. He currently serves as the Secretary of State for Net Zero and Energy. And he's generally quite seen as one of the biggest green figures, not Green Party figures, but green energy figures in the UK. His big problem is he's been leader once before and he lost. So do you want to go back to someone who's already proven to be a loser? So it's sort of, those four are the four biggest contenders. All of them have massive problems. None of them are an obvious choice. And I think that's also one of the big reasons why none of them have challenged Starmer yet, because they know that they're not super strong. There is no obvious successor.
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on since, at least Keir Starmer's in popularity. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but since the budget, I remember the budget very strongly. They put opinions all around. We will not raise taxes, and they tried to keep that promise. Some would say they didn't exactly follow that promise because they did not increase inflation targets for base salaries, right? So just to get you to just a quick recap, normally you have an inflation adjusted salary tax increase every single year because, of course, if you keep the ceiling for certain tax levels at a certain level and money decreases in value, then eventually you're paying more in taxes every single year. So they did not raise that ceiling and they didn't call that an increase in taxes. And I remember that was really big news. And correct me if I'm wrong here. This is around the time as well. There was a big scandal with Rachel Reeves crying during the PMQ questions. Don't want to get too much into the details, but is this the downfall of Starmer, especially since he was voted in as a protest vote from many years of Tory rule? But has this been since basically the budget of 2025 or 2024 even that Keir Starmer has been struggling?
Yeah, I mean, arguably it's been a couple of months into his premiership that he's been struggling, but it's really been sort of, I think from mid-2025 onwards was when it was clear that, there are movements going on to replace Keir Starmer. He might not survive this whole term. He might be ousted before we even reach the halfway point of his full term. So yeah, it's been going on for quite a while. I'd say it really starts with the freebie scandal, but then, as you said, it was the issue about disability payments. That was where the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the very posh name in the UK for the finance minister, she was seen crying in the House of Commons when the party in government lost their own vote, or knew that they would lose it, so they effectively created like a fake new policy. It was a massive mess for them, and sort of since then, you're right, it's just been downhill for him. Really, really bad timing he's had almost since day one.
But Jonas, so this Andy Burnham, I just want to zoom in him a little bit more because Polymarket, I know you can't take, those are the betting odds pretty much, but nonetheless, he's quite up in front. And you said he is the mayor of Manchester or what? No, yes. Yeah.
Manchester.
Okay. But if Starmer really does hit that threshold, I think you mentioned 1,600, if they lose 1,600 seats, then that's kind of like the end for Starmer, or at least very close to the end. He is the most likely guy to take him over. And I just want to know, what is his positioning? Is he more of a centrist, or is he more towards the left or more towards the right of Starmer? What kind of politics can we expect for someone like that?
He is a bit more to the left of Starmer. He is what you'd call sort of the Labour soft left. which is this sort of quite prolific faction within the Labour Party. You see it especially amongst people in the north of England. Labour MPs in the north of England really subscribe to this form of Labour politics, which is a few steps to the left of Starmer on economic policy and social policy altogether.
All right. Should we have a look back at the results? If there's anything new, because I heard that the Greens won their first seat in Scotland.
Yes.
I think is
Yes.
that true?
It is true. I just saw it on the TV as well. So this is Edinburgh Central. So you really, really need to zoom in on Edinburgh here to see it. It's very hard. It's sort of between the red and the orange there. There you go. So this is the first ever constituency seat that the Scottish Greens have won. It was won by Lorna Slater, who is the former co-leader of the Scottish Greens. And this has been quite a prolific contest throughout this whole election, because there was talk that Angus Robertson could potentially lose the seat to the Greens. But there could also have been a case where, because the Greens and the SNP were fighting for it, that the Labour candidate sort of came up in the middle somehow. But yeah, massive victory for Lorna Slater in a very, very urban area, in a very sort of, she's a very prolific figure, but it's also a very student-y area. It's a very diverse area, a lot of young people. So this makes sense for one of the first Scottish Green seats. But they'll take this as a massive victory, and they should, because milestone in the Scottish Greens history.
I mean, yeah, congratulations to them for sure. But again, talking about splitting the vote, I mean, that's what seems to be happening here again, right? All of these, they only won 36% and won the seat that way, which is, I mean, it's not too low, I guess. But yeah, it seems like splitting the vote from the other parties happened again.
Yeah, but less of like, if you add the Greens and the SNP, they are at the end of the day allies, even though the Greens just took the seat from the SNP. They do have over 50%, I believe, just from quick head maths.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So most of the vote splitting you talk about in Scotland is when it's a unionist versus a pro-independence person. That's when you really get those splits. This right here is more just, it's kind of a strange election, actually, because you don't see this very often, that there are so many parties over 20%. 3 parties over 20% is actually quite wild, because normally in Scotland, you talk about, this is the tactically smart vote for pro-independence. This is the tactically smart vote for pro-unionism. So this is one of those unique little cases where that's not quite the case.
The interesting here, though, Jonas, what I think is, look, you can see the Conservative, they lost 13%.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder where those votes went, because even Reform UK didn't do that well there. So looks like Conservatives are losing to more left-wing parties too here. Or am I seeing that wrong?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I reckon something will have happened in the line of Conservatives. Some went for Reform UK, of course, but others maybe went for Labour because they saw Labour as the tactically smart vote to not get a Green or an SNP candidate. But then, of course, Labour's also at minus 5.5%. So you'd probably imagine that some Labour voters voted Green because they were excited about Lorna Slater, for example. They were excited. You get progressive Labour voters as well, who could have shifted over towards the Greens. So this is one of those weird places where you might have seen a shift from one party while another group of people are shifting to another one. But yeah, this is a fascinating result, isn't it?
Yeah. And overall, we now have 42 SNP. So what was, again, 65 was the magic number, right? Yeah.
65. And I'm just looking at the chat. Some people are still dumbfounded by the reform vote, how people are voting for reform after Brexit. And for those of you who just joined me, we talked about that a lot before, so I'm not going to go into detail again. But the essential gist of it is reform has been very popular as the protest vote against Keir Starmer and his government, as well as the Tories, which were in power right before Labour. If you remember, there was the Tories under Boris Johnson and a few prime ministers. Then there was Labour with Keir Starmer as a protest vote against Boris Johnson and the Tories, and not just them, but successive prime ministers. But they haven't been doing a very good job either. And so now people are moving towards reform, especially when it comes to immigration, an issue which has gained a lot of traction in the UK. There was a big protest back a few months ago in London against immigration, and as well as a few scandals when it comes to immigrant hotels in the United Kingdom, and as well some unfortunate events when it comes to some terrorist attacks or some killings by some unfortunate individuals. But one thing I want to ask, we are a pro-EU channel, so potentially both to you and to Jonas, but I'd like to get Jonas's opinion first. Which is the most pro-EU party in this election? Which one? I mean, we know the Greens and the Lib Dems have always been very pro-EU. I know Lib Dems even have a schedule for rejoining the EU eventually. But which party would be the most pro-EU? And maybe could you rank them for us? Which one of them are most pro-EU to the least pro-EU?
Most pro-EU is the Liberal Democrats. They've got a long history of being pro-EU. There is probably not a Liberal Democrat out there who doesn't want to rejoin the EU. Then I would probably go sort of a split SNP Plaid in second place. They both envision a future for Scotland and Wales, respectively, where it's a part of the EU. And then, but there will be small factions within those parties that's slightly anti-internationalist. We saw this with the SNP had a massive fight some years ago about NATO, with a lot of members of the SNP being very anti-NATO. And we've seen, SNP leaders sort of turn to Russia. Alex Salmond, former leader of the party, had a very prominent show on Russia Today for a while. But the party's moved beyond that. Plaid is also very pro-EU. So I put those sort of shared second. And then after that, I put the Greens. Again, the Greens have these factions within the party that are anti-internationalist, anti-NATO, and that sometimes also bleeds over into some anti-EU policies. And you probably have some fairly small factions within it that have some sympathies towards a Russia, for example, or towards more of the eastern sphere of the world, and have an anti-Western approach to that, and being anti-EU sort of falls under that. But generally speaking, all of these parties outwardly very pro-EU, and the leadership very pro-EU. So I wouldn't walk around being scared that, if the Greens do well, that means that the UK is going to align itself with Russia. It won't. But I'm just saying there are factions within those parties that mean that I'm putting them below the Lib Dems.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this elsewhere, right? LFI in France, who've gone very far left to be anti-EU and pro-Russia, I would argue, in some senses of that. And I just want to go, people are talking about this, restore Britain. Perhaps we could have another look at Norfolk, Lambertus. I'm not sure if you have access to that, or if we have some results on that. It's on the county council and back in Norfolk, just there. It seems to be still in light gray. Yep, you were there. And Norwich, sorry, not Norfolk. Norfolk. Is there any results? There's nothing yet, but it'd be really interesting, as we have some viewers who are interested in Restore UK. They're very anti-EU, by the way, for anyone who is wondering. But I have seen the Greens be, regarded as a far left party, and perhaps some questions on that. I mean, there were some controversies where they had tweeted or made some videos in Arabic and had targeted, for example, some immigrants from Arabic countries, as well as been very left-wing and very tied to the Democratic Party in the US. Is that something that they're doing more vocally in a larger way? You were talking about some scandal with regards as well to some Palestinian protests that they wanted, some scandal with their leader as well. Sorry, I haven't phrased that very well. I'm a little bit tired, but just your thoughts on that, Jonas, if you could.
Yeah. So generally speaking, the Greens have had a pretty rough week leading into this election. It comes from some of their local councillors or council candidates being taken off of the ballot, or at least not being allowed to stand as Greens because of some anti-Semitic comments that they made in social media or in the public. I think it was up to something like 30 candidates, which, when you look at the whole scheme of how many candidates parties stand, is not crazy amounts. Reform UK has had problems with this as well, and so have most of the other parties to some extent. However, then you all might remember a terrorist attack in London just about a week ago, I reckon, where 3 people were injured. Zach Polanski, after that incident, shares a video of the police officers apprehending the suspect and condemning the police for being too violent against the suspect for committing this anti-Semitic terror attack. And for a party leader to come out ahead of any investigations and to say, these police did this wrong, especially when it's such a sensitive issue and the party already has these hints of anti-Semitism allegations against it. Wasn't a very good look. He later came out to apologize about it, but it's been in the news a lot. This was a bit of a problem for the party. I don't know if this is really featuring in the result, though. They're still, doing well where they're supposed to, and we're still waiting for the places where they're really, really supposed to do well. But in terms of professionalization of the party, it's also the first time that they're this big of a feature in a party or in an election. So we're still waiting to see sort of, they could very easily professionalize in the next couple of years. I don't know if that answered the question. I think I forgot the actual thing you were asking for. I just went on a tangent there.
Yeah, just some scandals related to the Greens. I mean, just to clarify, I definitely do not think tweeting in a different language is far left or anything of the sort, but definitely the media had talked about it and it was very big online.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So that was during the Gorton and Denton by-election. They made some posts in Urdu where they were accused of sort of sectarianism, both against the white population there, but also against Hindus. Because they took very sort of anti-Modi stances in those videos, stances that they didn't take publicly in English, for example. So there was quite a bit of controversy around that, and it led to a massive back and forth between them and Reform. Reform obviously coming out really, really hard, saying you shouldn't campaign in a foreign language, and that sort of became a thing.
Sometimes I really wonder who does the PR for these parties, because I mean, like, you can almost guess that stuff like that would happen after you do something like that, But yeah. Anyway, I guess it is what it is.
Maybe that was the strategy. Maybe they wanted that fight with Reform UK, where they could sort of present Reform UK as a party that's against foreign languages in a constituency where they have a lot of foreign language speakers.
Yeah, I guess so. But it is. I mean, I'm wondering. I mean, if a party starts doing campaigns in a language that's different than the language of the country, I could see how that could also get quite some backlash, right? But anyway, I mean, we're going off at a tangent there. I wouldn't, if I was the PR manager, I definitely wouldn't be doing that. But yeah. Anyway, is there any? If we go back to the elections, maybe is there anything new coming up? Because the Greens are getting some more seats now they were before. Now at plus 141. Here in England. So are there any updates here that are worth talking about? Maybe we have another look at Manchester, if there's anything there.
Yeah, I think we will be totally done with Manchester at this point in terms of all the seats counted, but we can go in, have a look, see what they're looking like there, because that's 18 Green seats, as massively well done for the Greens.
Reform exactly.
Going forward, and you see where all these seats are coming from. I think literally every single seat that Reform and the Greens took were from Labour.
Yeah, not good for Labour there.
Nope, definitely not. I'm going to have a look at Birmingham.
But does that also, but maybe very quick question, does it also reflect on the potential next Prime Minister? So Burnham was his name? I can't remember.
Burnham.
Yeah, exactly, Burnham. Does it reflect badly on him when his Labour Party in Manchester, or the Manchester Council, is doing so badly if he wants to potentially be the next Prime Minister?
It could very well. He's quite interesting because he was supposed to give a speech this morning, but he ended up cancelling it. So we're all sort of watching to see what he says, whether he takes this as a way to launch a campaign against Starmer. And what his argument could be there is people voted based on national politics. That's not fair for a city like Manchester. It's your fault, Keir Starmer. But Keir Starmer might try to, turn it back on Burnham. So that'll be very interesting to watch. And another thing that people will be watching is how many Labour seats go to Greens and how many go to Reform UK people, because that sort of will also factor into any determination of which way should Labour turn after Keir Starmer. Should they move rightwards or should they move leftwards? If the Greens end up stealing way more of their seats, Greens make sense. If it's Reform, well, then they should turn rightwards if they want to re-win those people. So there will be a lot of Labour people watching all of this very closely.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
go ahead.
I'm sorry to interject. I'm just thinking part of what has made the Greens, at least at least in this channel, so popular, but also online, is Liberal Democrats, the Greens, have been a lot more forthcoming when it comes to UK-EU relations, especially when Trump has done something against the UK here and there. They've been very vocal about it. And looking at these results, yeah, it's definitely not a landslide for Liberal Democrats or the Greens, and it's looking very good for reform. But I would argue that's almost a splitting of the votes, right? Just because of the way that this is kind of structured, first past the post. These are quite good results if you look at it all encompassing. Green up 144 seats on some of the competitive ones. This looks like potentially for the next general election, if there can be a more sweeping of the tide or potentially something, might I even say a coalition, Liberal Democrats and the Greens can have quite a good standing, especially when it comes to future EU-UK relations, something that I've been saying for a long time. The more pro-EU you are, the more you're rewarded politically. What do you think? Both Lambertus and Jonas.
I honestly don't think local elections were about the EU very much. So I am not sure. I think it does help currently to be anti-Trump, anti-US. I think that really does help a lot at current elections because Trump is so unpopular. But I think the European Union elections like this on a local level, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonas, but I don't think it played much of a role. No. Yeah, that's what I thought too. I think it might play a lot of a bigger role when the UK goes to the polls in 2029, but in local elections, I doubt it. But yeah. Maybe honest to wrap it all up, because we've been streaming for 2.5 hours and we kind of go over the three countries, and maybe you as the expert give your verdict of maybe the winner and the loser of the night with the current standing of how things are looking. So maybe starting with England. So let me just refresh to make sure everything's there correct. Who would you say is the biggest winner at the current standing? We're not done yet. And the biggest loser for England?
The biggest winner, 100% Reform UK. They're picking up a bunch of county council seats. They're picking up a bunch of district council seats. They're doing well in everywhere where they should be doing well. In rural areas, they've won a London Borough Council for the first time. That's massive for Reform, a party you normally think of as like a rural area, but they've won Havering in London, which is big for them. Also doing pretty well, you've got the Greens. We're still waiting for the best parts of, green turf, which is central London, but also to an extent Birmingham. So, we'll have to wait and see to be able to confirm whether they are going to do as well as a lot of people are expecting. And the biggest loser, of course, is Labour. They're losing seats to the Greens. They're losing seats to Reform. They're losing seats in the cities. They're losing seats in the rural areas. There's very little silver lining for Labour here. The only silver lining maybe being current forecasts have them losing less seats than the magic minus 1,500. That would be catastrophic for them. So
I just think it's funny that like there's as long as we don't lose 1,500 or more, we're okay. It sounds pretty drastic already how many they're losing. And just very quickly before we move to Wales, Conservatives, are they currently losing more than expected or less than expected?
They're losing slightly less than expected, actually. It's not a great night to be Kemi Badenoch, of course. But that being said, people were expecting them to lose seats. And they knew that they were going to lose seats, especially to Reform in these county council areas, especially. So, it could have been worse, but it's not great.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. And let's go to Wales. Let's have a look how they are doing. 1 second. So in Wales, we currently, it's switching around. It's just very annoying. I wish there was an easier link. I think there's a link a bit below. Here, let's have a look somewhere here. Oh, no, there's not. 1 second. I need to go back. All right. Give me 1 second. We'll go to Wales. Here we go. So Wales, we currently have, well, why am I talking? Who do you think is the winner and the loser of the Welsh election?
Winner is definitely Plaid Cymru. They are on track to be the next leaders of a government. They're not on track for a majority, it seems. So they'll need to work together with some other party, maybe the Greens, maybe if they need to also the Liberal Democrats and Labour. But they're on track for a absolutely historic election result for them. Reform are also doing well. They weren't expecting to win in the sense of leading the next government. They were expecting to be neck and neck with Plaid. They're maybe slightly underperforming, but I mean, at this point, that's still a massive victory for a party that's never stood properly and run a big campaign in Wales. We're also seeing the first ever Green seat in Wales, which is a big deal for that party, and a big deal for the fact that Wales is now turning into what appears to be a six-party country. And I would also note that Labour have been out admitting to defeat in Wales, saying they understand they will not lead the next government. And we also understand, although the results aren't in, a lot of Labour people are speaking to the media saying that their leader and the current First Minister of Wales, Eluned Morgan, will not re-win her seat. So that's a massive loss for Labour here.
Yeah, so Labour losing everywhere pretty much is the message.
Yep.
In terms of losses. Okay, and then if we go to Scotland, so here, what's your verdict here?
My verdict is this is an excellent day for the Scottish National Party, the SNP. I mean, that's obvious from that graph. That looks crazy, doesn't it? It's worth remembering, though, looking at this graph, that this is only half of the electoral system in Scotland. Scotland uses mixed member proportional or additional member system, meaning that after all of this has been counted, we're then also going to move over to the levelling seats. So that's where Reform will spike. The Greens will do well because of that, and so will especially the Conservatives and the Labour. But the SNP are still doing very, very well. They're profiting off of a split unionist vote. So all of the anti-independence parties are splitting the vote now that Reform UK has entered the scene. And they're winning seats that I don't think a lot of people expected them to win. For example, they won seats up in the northeast that people thought might actually go to Reform. They took the Eastwood seat just outside of Glasgow, which people were expecting to go to the Conservatives, and they're taking pretty much all of the seats in Glasgow. They've lost a single seat to the Greens, which is the first ever constituency seat that the Greens have won in Scotland, which is a pretty big deal for that party. And we're expecting them to do pretty well on the list as well. One other interesting thing is I think Reform are underperforming on the constituency vote. They're not getting those second place finishes that a lot of polling had them finishing with. But we're expecting them to do pretty darn well on the list. Of course, that's expectation and stuff I've heard from people on the ground, but I think we could expect them to get about 20 seats.
So we have a question in the chat quickly and asking whether the SNP will get a majority. Is that looking like they might or not? Or is it hard to say, I guess, right?
It is hard to say, but I'm almost tempted to say it looks like they're going to be very, very close, if not succeed at it. I've been a bit of a pessimist around the SNP getting a majority this time around, but they're winning seats like Ayr that might have gone the other way. They're winning seats like Eastwood. They won Bempshire. I mean, these are seats that we thought might go another way. So they're going to get it close. If they don't get the majority, they're going to get close. But they're not going to get any of the levelling seats. They're only going to win on the constituency vote. And that's just that's just due to the fact that they do so well in the constituencies.
So if I'm summarizing everything you've said, Jonas, I'm thinking that, of course, the biggest loser is Labour. The biggest winner seems to be, if things continue as they are, Reform UK and potentially also SNP. The Greens maybe here and there too. So if we're now looking at the next couple of months or even year in the UK, can we expect Starmer to, first of all, resign in the next couple of weeks? Do you think that might happen? Or how do you see the story moving on in the UK?
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that Starmer resigns within the next couple of days or weeks. I've been saying that for too long, though. I've been a Starmer pessimist for ages, so maybe this will just be added to the long list of times when I said now he's going to have to resign. But I mean, this is a terrible result for Labour. It's terrible for them in Scotland and Wales, where they've historically just been really, really strong. And the question now is, will the other contenders to be leader after him, will they start mobilizing? Will backbenchers start mobilizing? And how will the cabinet react to this? Will senior members of Labour go out and say, okay, Keir, it's time?
Is there maybe also new elections, right? I mean, that's probably super unlikely, right? Because I mean, why would Labour give up their majority in the parliament? Or am I seeing that wrong?
You know, there's no way that there will be early elections, because Labour backbenchers wouldn't want to force it, because then they're out of a job. The Labour government wouldn't want to force it, because then they're out of a job. Yeah, there's no winning for Labour in calling an early election, so they would definitely not do that.
And that's quite controversial, right? Because I mean, given these results, Labour getting absolutely pummeled, is there going to be a question about if democracy is being properly upheld, given these kind of results for Labour?
Yeah, I mean, there will be factions, especially factions of sort of reform type voters who will say that this is, this is a mandate for early elections. I don't think it'll be a larger narrative. There have been pushes to try to force an early election before, some massive petitions that have been signed with people saying, well, we've got 1 million people saying that you should call early elections. But at the end of the day, that's not how the system works. And I think most people recognize that.
Jonas, you've been awesome at explaining everything here today in the live stream. And I know you have a live stream tonight on your own channel. I'm not sure what time it was. Was it 7 or 6:30? Remind me, please.
Yeah, 7 o'clock. CET.
Yeah, so all of the audience, please do check the description. There's a link to Jonas's channel, or search Jonas Laursen on YouTube, and you can find his live stream at 7 o'clock. And also check out his channel. It's great for everything to do around politics. You do very good explainers, Jonas, around what I think you did one on Bulgaria a couple of weeks ago too, explaining the Bulgarian parties, which was very interesting. So thanks for the great content.
No, thank you for having me on. I love to come on to these live streams. It's a bunch of fun to talk about elections.
Yeah, we love elections too. So yeah, Paul, anything from your side before we close the stream?
No, I just want to say thank you to everyone who sent us super chats, everyone who was engaged here today. Nice to see your usernames pop up on the chat on the screen. It's great to have so many people come back. And of course, thank you, Jonas, for making the time, especially since, time away from your own channel. So we really, really, really appreciate it. And for everyone who's on the stream, I would highly, highly recommend to check out Jonas's stream. I mean, after the Danish elections, I watched your stream till like midnight. It was a fantastic content, to be honest. And I would like to remind everyone who is watching, we also have a Spotify that we're trying to grow. We're not very consistent with uploading so far, but if you have time, please do check it out, as well as my own Substack. It's just down in the description. Both of these are in the description. We also have now Mastodon. I think you just created that, Lambertus. So do check out our links in the description, especially Jonas's, for making the time to come with us. I think you have a few shout outs to do too, Lambertus, but on my side, that's about it.
No, that's all there is. Thank you everyone for joining, and see you in the next live stream.
The Discord.
Yeah, of course. We have a Discord if you would like to discuss politics. Definitely join the Discord. The links are in the description. And yeah, we discuss these elections and all kinds of politics all day and every day. So thank you, everyone. And see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.